left-shouldered right-hander ready. And that one is muscled out towards second. Funny hop for Donovan. Throws on the run, and he got it. Michael McGreevy's first big league inning is under his belt. The pitch. Bouncing ball to third. Arenado's got that. McGreevy breezes through the fourth inning. He's set down 10 in a row. Ground ball to second. He's going to be through 7 in his big league debut. Listen to this crowd in St. Louis.
Really, that was a spot start. Man, we got to try to keep him here then. If he goes 7 innings against, a lineup like that, he could help us win.
With Tanner Hendrickson and Grant Francis, I'm Brandon Kiley. Alex out today. Michael McGreevy, though, fantastic yesterday. 10-1 win for the Cardinals. They win the series against the Texas Rangers. And the story of the game was the young Michael McGreevy. 7 innings, 5 hits, only 3 strikeouts. We knew coming into this thing that is not his game. He is somebody that pitches to contact. He's got a similar type of a vibe to a Miles Michaelis. Great command. And it's going to come down to, hey, did you get the batted ball luck on that given day? If yes, the answer is yes, it's a flow chart. If yes, then you pitched well. If no, things could get ugly.
Went to the bullpen early.
Yesterday, it went well for him. And the results were fantastic. The Cardinals could not have asked for a better start out of Michael McGreevy. So much that after the game, Tommy Pham said, whoa, that was a spot start? That guy rocks. We should keep him around. He can help us win. I respect him saying that. He looked good yesterday. T-Bone, when I heard that Michael McGreevy was going to be starting yesterday against the Texas Ranger, my initial impression was, uh-oh. My son is saying, uh-oh now, and that was my vibe with Michael McGreevy. This could go really poorly. It did not. It did the opposite. Did it open up your eyes to what McGreevy could be for the Cardinals again?
Yeah, it did for me because you're right. I expected it to be kind of Miles Michaelis-y to where it was going to be not a lot of swing and miss. It was going to be pitching to contact. But when he showed up to that game and was throwing 6 different pitches and was locating at the corners well and getting to the ground, 12 of his 21 outs on the ground, made me go, okay, that guy might be major league ready. Now, they don't have room for him right now, so sorry, Tommy. He is going to have to go celebrate his first big league victory in Memphis with that barbecue tomorrow. But I was really impressed. I think it did make me raise the ceiling of, wow, Michael McGreevy can be a 2. But I think I said, you know what? I can see where that guy could be a number 4 for the Cardinals in the future, potentially. Be what Miles Michaelis is, that's not $18 million. And if you saw the formula for his success, you're right. If he's on the ground, if he's throwing strikes, and he's pitching to contact, he can have Miles Michaelis outings that you've seen in the past, where he can go 6, 7 innings, limit the damage, and fall into a little bit of batted ball luck. I think it did raise the ceiling for me because I was not expecting that yesterday. I kind of had the same vibe as you going into that of, oh boy, if he struggled at AAA as a pitch to contact guy, what's he going to look like at the majors? Yesterday was really impressive for Michael McGreevy.
To me, it both opened my eyes up to what he could be and also the pitfalls of what he could be. And what I mean by that is, hey, yesterday was great because the batted ball luck went his way, and you look back on it, and it's 7 innings, and it looks awesome when there's only 1 run posted on the board. The downside of this is, hey, he's probably a number 5 starter for you, and that's not inherently a bad thing, but when things don't go his way, the expected batting average against him yesterday was like 300. He got fortunate, and that is not to diminish anything that he did. He got fortunate, and the results were great, dude. He got through 7, and you now have a refreshed bullpen going into this weekend against the Cubs at Wrigley, which is something they desperately needed because of the way that he was able to pitch yesterday. The downside risk is, hey, he could have some Miles Michaelis outings for you. Could be 4 innings. He kind of eats it, gives up 6 earned runs, and you just live to fight another day. But why it did open my eyes and why I do think yesterday was encouraging for Michael McGreevy, he now knows his stuff plays at this level. He now knows when he goes back down to AAA, which is probably going to be announced later on today, I have big league stuff. The stuff analytics numbers that came out after the game yesterday suggested, and you could take these or leave them, he had the second best stuff of any Cardinal starter so far this year, based upon what he threw yesterday. That's meaningful. He now can go down and say, I have confidence in myself that whenever I am called back up to the big league level, I know I can have success at that level. It also makes me wonder, is there a scenario where maybe his stuff actually plays better at the major league level than it does in AAA? And that may sound weird, and this is kind of a half-baked idea. I wonder if there's something to, like, we've never seen a greater divide between what guys are doing at AAA and then what they become at the major league level. We've seen this with Jackson Holliday, for example, on the hitting side of things. He's amazing at AAA, comes up to the big league level and had like one of the worst starts to a career we've ever seen by a major prospect. Yesterday he had a grand slam. Hopefully this time it goes a little better for him. But on the pitching side of things, you see something similar where there's a divide between what guys are doing there and what they do when they get to the big league level. McGreevy pitches to so much contact, and it makes me wonder, like, because of the way that defenders are at the big league level, because of just the fewer variables at the major league level, where you've got a center fielder in Michael McGreevy who's just going to run everything down. You've got a shortstop and Mason Wayne who's just going to make every play that is hit to him. This infield is going to be perfect for a guy like McGreevy. You've got a catcher who understands what you are every time you go out there. Is it possible that McGreevy's stuff, the way that he pitches, is actually better for the majors than it is for the minors, even though that sounds strange because you're going up against better hitters at this level, T-Bone?
I think there's a slight little variable of that because of what you said, because of the defense. Because you think down to like the Memphis Redbirds and where he's been pitching, like they've got Jose Fermin that's down there, who's not like a great defensive second baseman. You've got Prito and Sajaci, who I don't think are really great. Like, I don't think Sajaci's a great like shortstop. Everybody seems to think he's probably more destined for a second baseman. And then like in the outfield there for a while, they had Moises Gomez roaming out there, and we saw him. That's a big dude roaming in the outfield. So I think there probably is a little bit of that plays to it.
And even in center, like, this is not to diminish anything that Victor Scott could be, but right now he's not the same kind of center fielder that we have seen from Michael Ciani here at the big league level.
Yeah, I think there is a little bit to that. Now, I don't think it's significant enough to where all of a sudden a Michael McGreevy would go from a guy that had a, I think, 4.7 ERA, if I'm not mistaken, 4.45 ERA in AAA, to like all of a sudden having a 3 ERA at the big league level. Because I think most of it just comes down to batted ball luck.
But could he be a 4.5 ERA guy at the big league level? Because like that's my hope.
I'm with you. I agree.
He can be a 5.
Yeah.
If he, like, the value of guys like Michael McGreevy to a Cardinals team that has had to pay $15 million for that role in recent seasons cannot be overstated. If you go into next year, and I don't know that they'll do this, but it's something that you can now potentially think about as we've seen his stuff play at this level. If you go into next year and maybe you trade a Miles Michaelis in the offseason, 1 year, $18 million, that's something that another team could take on and be like, you know what, he can be our Zach Eflin. The Orioles literally just traded for Zach Eflin at that dollar figure for next season. Could somebody view that as valuable for Miles Michaelis to do for them what he's done for the Cardinals? Possibly. And now instead of paying $18 million for this role, you're paying $1 million for it. Okay, well, what could I use that $17 million in savings for a team that is appearing to be cash-strapped for next season? Could that get you combined with the $10 million in savings that they're getting next year via the offsetting of Sonny Gray plus Paul Goldschmidt? Could that go get you another number 2 starter in the market this offseason? Maybe. Could I use that $25 million to just bolster my bullpen with 2 more arms out there? So I'm getting McGreevy in the rotation plus 2 bullpen arms for what I previously was paying for Miles Michaelis. Okay, I could see how that works. I don't know if that's something they'll do. It's 1 start. Don't want to make too much of it. But those are the things that start turning in my head as I see, okay, this dude's a major league caliber pitcher. This dude can do it at this level. Or maybe another team watches what we saw yesterday and says, Michael McGreevy's a major league starter. We're going to trade for that guy in the offseason. He now has a little bit more value than he did 48 hours ago. These are all things that go through my head as I'm watching him succeed at the major league level for the Cardinals yesterday. It also makes me wonder, are we underestimating some of what they have down in AAA? And if we're doing it, the Cardinals are doing it even more than we are. Because they didn't want Michael McGreevy up at the big league level.
No.
They've told you that with their actions all year long. Gordon Graceffo, they barely trusted to throw 3 innings the last time that he was up. I kind of liked what I saw from Gordon Graceffo when we saw him. So now you look at it, you're like, okay, Kloffenstein looked good. Graceffo looked pretty good. McGreevy now looked good. And they have had no interest in bringing up any of these guys. Maybe they're once again undervaluing what they have in their AAA rotation, and maybe they can give them a little bit more than they expected.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because me and Alex were watching the game in the office yesterday after the show together, and he said to me, why is it the Cardinals couldn't see this in Michael McGreevy down in AAA already? And I said, I don't know, because you're right. You see what these guys have done. And yeah, I understand you're going to have a short leash with them. And if you don't have a big lead yesterday, McGreevy probably goes 5 innings, maybe. But I think what you've seen from them is, hey, their stuff can potentially play here at the big league level. And it goes back to what we've talked about, and what's been frustrating is, why have you been kind of clogging up your roster with bullpen arms? Like, why not Gallegos a spot who they DFA'd? Why was he not DFA'd in early July and maybe see if Graceffo can play out of the bullpen? Or when you have those spot starts, rather than really putting yourself at a disadvantage with Matthew Liberatore getting that start, shortening your bullpen, and really, let's just be honest, put Matthew Liberatore at a disadvantage. Why are you not bringing up a Michael McGreevy who's looked really good yesterday? Why did you not bring up a Gordon Graceffo whose stuff looks pretty good? Kloffenstein, when he was healthy down in the minor leagues, was pitched well in the one game we saw at Rick Woodfield. It is a little frustrating that they continue to seem to undervalue what they have at AAA. And you know what? It's possible it does go poorly. But at least I know then. You know, that's what's been so frustrating is I've been saying, why would you not let Gordon Graceffo pitch? Why would you not let Michael McGreevy pitch? Worst case scenario is to say, okay, he's not ready. Best case scenario is you may have found a diamond in the rough, just like they appear to have found with some guys on their roster that made it for the big league camp on opening day.
314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line to get involved in the show. YouTube chat is off and running. YouTube.com/101ESPN STL. That is where the graveyard is available for you today. Somebody from the text line on from the 314 says, guys, it was just one start. Don't get ahead of yourself. I'm not trying to get ahead of myself.
Rotation for next year.
I think he's put himself into the conversation for next season. I think Palante is firmly in your rotation next year with what he has done. And I think Michael McGreevy just showed you yesterday, hey, worst case scenario, if this is your 6th guy, if he is the first one that is coming up for spot starts next season, he's capable of that. And for the last 3 or 4 seasons, that's a role that they have struggled to find. They have thrown Jordan Hicks into their rotation with no ability to get him ramped up. They have gone to Andre Palante before he was ramped up. They've tried to make it work with Zach Thompson.
Didn't they try
off
like Packy Naughton as well?
They've done like spot starts with Packy Naughton where he's going like 2 innings and then they flip the lineup, going to a righty after that. They've done Liberatore where he's having to go back and forth between the rotation and the bullpen. This is what it should look like. This is how good teams operate, is you have somebody at the AAA level that can come up and make a start if you need them to. The Cardinals had that. Think back to the best teams that they've had, right? Go back to 2015. Tyler Lyons was this. He was the guy that could come up, and if you needed him to, he could give you 5 strong innings, give up like 2 or 3 earned runs, gives you a chance that day, and then he sent it back down to AAA. 2 weeks later, he's doing the same thing. This is what the Cardinals have been missing. So it's nice to see that at a minimum, they have that now. And I'm not telling you he's going to be 7 innings, 1 earned run every time. I would be shocked if that's who Michael McGreevy is long-term. I think there's going to be some really bad starts where the batted ball luck goes the opposite direction, and it looks kind of like Miles Michaelis, but a young version of Miles Michaelis. The reason why I think this is super encouraging is because we have now seen multiple starters come from AAA to the major league level and have success for the Cardinals. I haven't seen that in like 5 years. That is something that should be celebrated. And yesterday was a good day for Michael McGreevy. It was a good day for the Cardinals. They needed that. With Tanner Hendrickson and Grant Francis, I'm Brandon Kiley. You've got BK and Ferrario here on 101 ESPN. Alex out today. He's doing great, guys. He's going to be back in shortly. Appreciate you asking about him on the text line today. Coming up in about 15 minutes or so, we're diving into some NFL quick hitters. We've got Jim Hickey, the Nationals pitching coach, joining the show at 12 o'clock today. He was the pitching coach for Erick Fedde in Washington. We want to ask him what he saw from Fedde then and what his reaction has been since he's been back in the big league level to see what Fedde has become. We'll talk to Jim Hickey about that coming up at noon. But coming up next, one of the underrated storylines of that game yesterday was the lead that the Cardinals were able to play with. This offense, is it starting to break out again? We'll talk about it next year on 101 ESPN.
Tommy Pham's got another hit. One run is in. Here comes Nolan. They're going to wave him around. They overshoot the cutoff man. Oh, Tommy Pham is red hot as a red bird. It's 7-0 St. Louis.
What it sounded like yesterday on Bally Sports Midwest with Tanner Hendrickson and Grant Francis. I'm Brandon Kiley. Tommy Pham coming through once again. He was not alone in that regard, but the double put the game essentially out of hand for the Texas Rangers. Cardinals end up winning that one 10-1. T-Bone, a lot of the conversation from yesterday, justifiably so, is going to be about what Michael McGreevy gave them. 7 innings, 1 earned run. That's a great spot start by the kid making his major league debut. It should not go overlooked, however, what the offense was able to do. I don't think Michael McGreevy gives you 7 innings. I don't think he's allowed to pitch 7 innings if they weren't pulling away by the time they got to the end of that 5th inning. They put up 5 runs in that inning. Now you're up 8-0 at that point in the game. That allows, if you're in Ollie's shoes, me to say, okay, well, we're going to throw him back out there for the 6th. And now we're going to throw him back out there for the 7th as well. You're able to buy yourself at least 2 more innings because of what your offense was able to come through to do. T-Bone, I looked this up yesterday. The Cardinals between May 29th and July 29th, so a 2-month stretch, won 4 games, exactly 4 games, by more than 4 runs.
Dang.
They have won each of their last 2 games since Tommy Pham was brought in by more than 4 runs. That allows you to operate so differently. It allows you to just exhale a bit if you're Ollie Marmol and you're looking at what you want to do with your bullpen now. Instead of having to go to your high leverage arms and use a bunch of dudes yesterday from the 6th through the 9th, you instead go to JoJo, who's working on a couple of things for the 8th inning, and then you go to Ryan Lutos, who was just brought up for the 9th, and it's a no-sweat proposition to get out of that game. The offense being able to come through in big spots and to put up some crooked numbers, that was every bit as big of a story yesterday as what you saw from Michael McGreevy.
Yeah, and it's the thing that they really missed in the first half of the season, because it's why they had to tax their high leverage arms a lot. It's why they had to keep going to those guys. And in some games, because you've used them so much, you end up having to go to your second tier of guys in those high leverage spots because you can't constantly throw Fernandez for 6 days in a row. And that's basically what Cardinals were playing, was constantly those close games. It allows you to what you said. It allows you to have your starter go out and eat a couple more innings. You don't really care about the third time through if you've got a massive lead like that. And I think the most important part, and it's something that they couldn't get to do early on in the season, is it allows you to work with a reliever that might be struggling like JoJo Romero. You can put him into a game. It's a low leverage spot. Okay, let's see how his stuff's been translating from his bullpen sessions now to the field. That was the issue they had early on in the year with Giovanni Gallegos. They kept saying, well, we got to get Gio right. We got to get Gio right. We got to get low leverage spots. Well, there were no low leverage spots. So you had to
they were either down or up by a run.
Yeah.
And in either of those scenarios, you didn't want Gio pitching.
Exactly. So you either have to put him in like a spot you really don't want him, or he just kind of becomes what he ended up being, which was just kind of a wasted roster spot, to where it was, well, we can't really use him, but we're not going to get rid of him just yet. So what exactly are we doing with them? That's why this offense, you really needed them to come through with not a lot of these games, but just can you sprinkle in 1 or 2 of these offensive explosions within a week, because it does so much for your pitching staff. It also does so much, especially if you win by a lot in these games, to get Goldie off his feet like they did yesterday. It gets Arenado off his feet. It gets Burley off his feet yesterday. So instead of having to potentially give one of those guys today off, for example, okay, well, they just rested for 4 innings. They didn't have to stand out there in 100-degree heat. Now they can probably give you an extra game before their next day off.
Ollie Marmol was quoted yesterday before the game from some of the writers. So there's no audio of this, but this was prior to the game yesterday. He said, quote, "We've been playing some good baseball, but Tuesday had a certain energy. It had a little bit more bleep you to it. I enjoyed it. And Wednesday, they were relentless." Here's Ollie Marmol after the game yesterday talking about if he feels like something special is happening with his club.
As soon as 5 o'clock hit yesterday and we knew what group we were rolling with, there was a certain mentality in that clubhouse where the guys are ready. And you could see it in their style of play yesterday. There's a certain grit to it that was fun to watch yesterday. And then today, they were relentless. We faced a good guy, and they didn't care. They went right after him, and some really big knocks. I mean, what Contreras did there, what Pham did. I mean, you go down that list. Nato with 2, it was impressive. And 1 through 9, there's the way they're looking at it. There's not a whole lot of breathing room, and you can see that.
You just played a good team. Texas Rangers are a good team, man. They did not sell at the deadline for a reason, and I understand they're under 500, but they've been playing some much better baseball in recent weeks. The Cardinals scored 21 runs total in the 3 games. You had 26 hits, 5 doubles, 3 home runs. Maybe most importantly, T-Bomb, Arenado 3 for 8 in the series. Paul Goldschmidt 4 for 11 with a walk. I don't know if what we're seeing with Paul Goldschmidt is real. I don't know, because I've fallen for this before. I was like, hey, here it comes. Paul Goldschmidt. I think it was early June. It's about to head in the right direction.
That Tigers game.
This is when it happens. And it didn't happen. We've gone another 2 months now, and he still looks like the same guy. He still has a slugging percentage below 400. He still has an on-base percentage below 300. Every time I look at his numbers, I'm like, man, really? It feels like he's been better than that for the last couple of weeks. Well, recently, he's been looking more like Paul Goldschmidt, dating back to like July 8th. He has an OPS over 800. That is 20%-ish above league average offensively. So he's been not Paul Goldschmidt of old, but a very good 5 or 6 hole hitter in your lineup. You'd sign up for that if that's what Paul Goldschmidt became for the rest of the season. And T-Bone, some of the underlying numbers suggest, okay, there's been some legitimate changes. Since July 8th, the stretch that we're talking about, where he's been better, about a 3-week stretch now, he's batting .300 with an .800 slugging percentage against 4 seams. He's batting .250, but with a .700 slugging percentage against sinkers. Prior to this, he was batting in the low 200s with a slugging percentage, especially against sinkers, of below 300. He's doing damage, finally, against fastballs. It seems like he's on time. He's catching up to those fastballs once again. Are you buying, this time, what we're seeing from Paul Goldschmidt?
I'm not going to buy in all the way yet from what we're seeing from Paul Goldschmidt, but I will dip my toe in the water a little bit because I do think he does look better. The one thing that does kind of concern me outside of the batted ball data is he's still not getting on base and he's not drawing walks. He's only got 2 walks since that July 8th period when you talk, what you referenced there. And that's when,
sorry, man.
When you talk about Paul Goldschmidt
sell out for power, baby,
being Goldie, he's drawing walks. He's also hitting for power, but it is encouraging to see. And this is why I'm willing to at least kind of buy in, kind of dip my toe in the water, those numbers you just read off against fastballs. Because, when you look back to when Goldie's been Paul Goldschmidt, he crushes fastballs. His MVP season, he destroyed the baseball when it was a 4-seam fastball against him. Even last year, even though it was a down year for him, he still hit the fastball pretty well, and he's able to put a little bit of power into it, almost slugged at a 450 clip last year against the 4-seam fastball. That's why I feel a little bit better about what we are starting to see, is he's now starting to do damage against fastballs. So that's why I'm willing to buy in a little bit, but because it's been what you talked about, where there was a stretch early on in the year where we kind of bought in and it just never really happened, I still need to see probably another week or 2 before I'm fully invested.
Let me make this very clear as to what I'm about to say. I'm not telling you the Paul Goldschmidt of old is back. I'm not telling you that. I don't think he is. I think Paul Goldschmidt can now be a contributing member of this offense. If you told me, hey, BK, do you think that Paul Goldschmidt is capable now of getting to an 810 OPS for the rest of the season, which is roughly 20% above league average, which was the exact numbers that he was for the entirety of the 2023 season. So what he was last year, can he be that the rest of the season for the Cardinals? I think I would say yes. I think he can be that version of Paul Goldschmidt. And if he is, there's a lot of ifs that are about to happen. And if Tommy Pham can continue keeping up, not what he's been the last 2 days, but a really good hitter for this lineup. And if these lefty bats that are in your lineup can keep up what they've been doing for the majority of the season. Dude, you've got a real lineup suddenly. You look at it in the way that it can be constructed against righties or lefties. Wynn, Contreras, Burleson, Goldie, Pham, Donovan, Pajes, and Ciani, who are both actually contributing members of the lineup now suddenly. Matt Carpenter kind of quietly has been a totally fine supplementary piece to this lineup recently.
You just bench Arenado?
Arenado's there. He's been fine. He's a really nice singles hitter for you as well. You're starting to see the elements of what this offense was supposed to be. It lacks what you thought Jordan Walker was going to be. It lacks what you thought Nolan Arenado was going to be, and that changes the ceiling of it. But can they be a above league average offense with an above league average starting rotation and a pretty damn good, at this point, bullpen? Yeah, and that is what a playoff team looks like. Not a great one, but a playoff team nonetheless.
Yeah, because I think you've said you got to have about that 6th spot is where you're looking for the great playoff teams. Well, that lineup that you just said, if all those ifs end up happening and Goldie and Pham end up being guys that can help contribute to this offense, Okay, now you're looking at 5 spots. And then depending on how you view Donovan in that 6th spot, I'd hear a little bit of argument potentially for him. But now you're looking at a lineup that's 1 through 5 that's solid. That's an offense that can potentially probably not get you to a World Series, but can at least get you through a playoff round or 2, and then you're going to need some help from your pitching staff in the playoffs.
Yeah, the spot that I still don't know about is your cleanup hitter. Like that's the one spot that they just don't really have an obvious answer to, because you go Wynn, probably Burleson 2, and then the 3/4. One of those 2 spots is where you just fall a little light compared to most of the contenders. Maybe at that point you could get Goldie back up into that 3 hole, go Contreras 4, and now you probably go like Donovan 5, and then Pham 6, Nootbaar 7, something like that.
And that's why I wonder if at some point they're going to try and get to where Newt or Donovan is in the 2 spot.
Sure.
Really, and I know like the whole modern day baseball is your best hitter hits too, and that's why they've been hitting Contreras and Burley kind of been flip-flopping in that spot recently. But I think when you look at that, because of what you're talking about, I would rather have 2 pretty decent on-base guys at the top, and then you've got your 3-4 in Burley, Contreras in some order, and then you've got
Contreras
Goldie 5.
is this team's cleanup hitter.
Yeah, I agree.
And he's the best guy for that job right now.
I think that's where by the time you get to around October, that's probably where you want him hitting. And then it just comes down to what 3 and 5 look like.
314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line for questions and answers. We'll get into that coming up in about 15 minutes or so. I have received the text from Alex, so I can now actually announce it. The reason why Alex is out today and why I will be the one that is going to the Federated Auto Parts Raceway at I-55 this Friday, so tomorrow from 4 to 6 o'clock for the Ironman 55, is because he and his wife last night welcomed their 3rd baby girl into this world. She is happy and healthy. Everybody is doing fantastic, so congratulations to the Ferrarios. Baby number 3 officially here, as Alex's wife said it would be. She was telling Alex for the last couple of weeks, hey, I think this is coming early. I think this is coming early. And Alex continually told us, I don't think it's coming early. I don't think it's coming
next
early.
Week.
And Alex is not here because he and his wife, Katie, have welcomed their 3rd baby girl into this world. So congratulations to the Ferrarios. You're going to be out today, out tomorrow, and then we'll kind of piece things together next week. T-Bone's going to have, I think, a producer party on Monday because I'll be in on the morning show.
Drive the bus on Monday.
And then I believe Alex is out for the majority of next week as well. And then we'll kind of keep you guys updated on what the schedule is going to look like. But Alex will be back soon. He and his wife welcomed in their 3rd baby girl.
We can call it paternity leave / short-term injured reserve for a lower body injury.
There you go. Yeah, all the above. He gets some nice rest and recuperation for his broken toe.
He was really hobbling yesterday.
Who do you think's hurting more today, him or his wife? I think he would tell you him.
I think he would tell you him,
I think
too.
he's telling Katie it's him.
100%. All right, coming up next, NFL Quick Hitters here on 101 ESPN.
Grant Francis here with a SportsCenter update driven by Johnny Londoff Chevrolet and Johnny Londoff Autoplex. Big win for the Cardinals yesterday. They took the series against the Rangers and won 10-1. It was their largest margin of victory so far this season. Michael McGreevy in his first MLB start went 7 innings, allowed 5 hits and only 1 earned run, so an outstanding first start for him in his MLB debut. Tommy Pham also stayed hot for the Cardinals. He went 3 for 4 yesterday with 2 RBI. Tonight, the Cardinals will look to stay hot as they head up to Chicago to start a 4-game series with the Cubs. First pitch will be at 7:05 from Wrigley, and it will be Sonny Gray going up against Shota Imanaga in the first of that series. I'm Grant Francis. The SportsCenter update's been driven by Johnny Londoff Chevrolet and Johnny Londoff Autoplex. See them at londoff.com. Chevy, together we drive. Are you kidding me?
With Tanner Hendrickson and Grant Francis, I'm Brandon Kiley. You've got BK and Ferrario here on 101 ESPN. Let's dive into some NFL quick hitters. T-Bone, you mentioned this before the show today. The Athletic put out a new podcast recently breaking down the top 10 offenses in the NFL heading into 2024. This is all based upon projection. This is all based on who they think, hey, who's going to score the most points this year, right? Don't get too fancy with it. We don't need to go into any of the nerdy numbers. If you had to project who you think, T-Bone, will be the top 3 offenses in the year of our Lord, 2023, who would you go with as the top 3 offenses for the upcoming season?
So number 1 for me, I think would still be the San Francisco 49ers. I think when you look at them, Brock Purdy, I don't think they've got a top 10 quarterback, but the system is so simple. He's got the best running back in the game. He's got great weapons on the outside and arguably a top 5 tight end, if not top 3 tight end in the NFL, and George Kittle. So I would probably go 49ers 1. And number 2 for me, and this one might surprise people, but man, I'm definitely falling for training camp hype, would be the Kansas City Chiefs. Woo! You got Patrick Mahomes, the best quarterback in the game going right now. Travis Kelce, the best tight end going in the NFL right now. And then we saw last year they didn't have a great receiving core outside of Rashee Rice. Well, this year you got Rashee Rice. I like what I'm seeing from Xavier Worthy. And they brought in Hollywood Brown in the offseason, which makes me think, okay, they've got a 1-2-3 trio that is really going to bring in the numbers for that Kansas City Chiefs offense. And then number 3 for me would be the Houston Texans. Now, I question if they'll be able to get there just because I'm still a little bit on their in their running back room, but C.J. Stroud, that's all I got to say. C.J. Stroud was awesome last year, and he didn't have Stephon Diggs, and I expect that he's going to be even better again this year. I think they're going to have a top 3 offense in the NFL.
Interesting. All right. So last year, for what it's worth, the top 5 offenses in the league based upon just points scored. Cowboys 1, Dolphins 2, 49ers 3. If you go beyond that, it was the Ravens and the Lions. You go all the way down, middle of the pack. You get to the Chiefs, who T-Bone has at number 2 this year. The Texans were at 12 last season in terms of where they ended up. Grant, you're an NFL guy as well. You like watching the league. 49ers, Chiefs, Texans is what T-Bone had. Do you agree with those 3? Would you substitute somebody out?
I think I would honestly substitute the Chiefs out just because of last season, them being 8th in the AFC in points scored. I think they're going to be good enough to get the job done. I don't think they're going to be top 3, though. I don't think they need to be top 3.
Sure.
So I think the Chiefs are still going to be obviously at the top of the AFC overall. But in terms of top 3 overall in the NFL, I don't think I'd have the Chiefs that high.
Who'd you have in place of them? Eagles, you said?
Well, I mean, the thing is that, I'm not super high on the Cowboys. But the fact that, last season, they scored 509 points and led the league. And, did they really lose anybody significant?
Tony Pollard.
Yeah,
okay.
But he wasn't great last year. They could bring Zeke back if it makes you feel better.
I still feel like the Cowboys are going to be
Tyron
up there.
Smith, their left tackle, but he was in and out with injuries last year.
Okay. So I still feel like the Cowboys are going to be up there in the top at least 5 of the league in terms of offense. Of course, not in the playoffs, in the regular season. I would say I had the Cowboys up there. I'd also look at the Dolphins as well.
And I'm glad you brought them up because the reason I didn't throw the Dolphins in there, I think they're going to be a top 5, if not top 10 offense. I don't think they're going to suddenly fall apart. I think now that the NFL's had a year to kind of adjust to that cheat motion that they really love to do, I think you maybe see their numbers come down just a little bit.
So I've got the 49ers at 1 as well. To me, they have the best combination of play caller, quarterback, weapons, everything that you could ask for. They've got it right now in San Francisco.
It's hard to argue against them.
They're undisputed until proven otherwise, in my opinion. At number 2 for me, I think that's where the conversation really begins. Is it crazy if I went with your Rams? Stafford potentially healthy this year. Hopefully Cooper Kupp is back and healthy. You added a couple of tight ends in the offseason. They have upgraded their offensive line in a meaningful way. They now have a legitimate backup running back this season in Blake Corum, so the depth has improved for them. I think the Rams might end up, and I think the defense is going to be bad. I think there's a chance the defense is really bad this season, so they're going to need to be in shootouts, kind of similar to what the Lions were a couple of years ago. As I look through and I'm trying to find my number 2 offense in the league this year, I don't think there's an obvious one that stands out. I think it's just a second tier of 8 teams that you can pick from. And to me, if I'm looking for a team that can kind of make that leap from being really good to excellent, I would say the Rams are one of those teams that immediately jumps out to me.
I could see it in, you mentioned the play caller in San Fran, Sean McVay is, to me, the second or third best offensive mind in the NFL.
Right.
The only concern for me is Kupp. I don't think he can stay healthy at this point in his career. He's dealing with muscle injuries, with hamstring that bothered him last year. If he's healthy and is Cooper Kupp of old, absolutely, they can get there because then you got Puka that's right there with them, and Robinson was awesome as their 3. This year, though, they don't really have a tight end that's going to be a pass catcher while Higbee's out. He's going to miss the first, 6 weeks is what it is projected as. So there's a lot of question marks, but I could see if everything breaks their way, they could easily be a top 3 offense.
And then my number 3 offense in the NFL heading into this season is the Dallas Cowboys. I just think they're going to put up a ton of points. They play fast. They're going to throw the ball all around. And they're going to end up winning 11 games this season, going to the playoffs and losing in the divisional round because that's what the Cowboys do.
And they're sort of the opposite of the Rams in the sense that they do have a really good defense, so they're not going to have to be in shootout games where they're going to have to feel like they need to score 40 points a game. The other offense, too, that I think could be improved, and maybe I have too much on this team, but the Ravens bringing in Derrick Henry.
Yeah.
If Mark Andrews can stay healthy, Lamar Jackson can stay healthy. They've got Zay Flowers. They've got some weapons on that team as well.
They were 4th last year. I mean, they were a really good offense last year. I think it kind of gets overlooked because they did have so many injuries and they don't have that sexy receiving core. The other thing to keep in mind with the Ravens offense, a lot of the time we talk about this with the Shanahan offense. Year 2 is really when they take the step. The Ravens had a completely new offense last year. Their offense coordinator came in and changed things entirely. They went from a primarily run-based system to a much more passing-centric type of an offense. I could see them taking a leap in that regard this upcoming season as well. I'd like to see them still add another pass catcher, but they're just never going to do that, it seems like. Zay Flowers is good. I just would like to see them get a legit number 1 big-time outside wide receiver, and they haven't really done that.
But I think the difference for the Ravens is, and his name's escaping me, but the running back that always got injured on that team for the past 2-3 years.
He's with the Chargers now.
Is that who it was, Gus Edwards?
No.
Why am I drawing a blank?
I've had him on my fantasy team for 2 years.
Dobbins.
Yes, J.K. Dobbins. They've never had a run game that really had to be super respected. Gus Edwards was fine last year.
Sure.
But this year they have a whole nother element to their game if Derrick Henry, of course, can stay healthy. But you have to respect him as a running back. So, if they can get the play action going even more and you have that dual threat, that's going to make them a lot more difficult to defend.
First game of the preseason is tonight. Texans versus the Bears as a part of the Hall of Fame game. T-Bone, I'm not going to ask you about this game because it doesn't
Oh, you don't
matter.
want to get bets on this one? Who are going to take?
Caleb Williams ain't playing in this one. I would assume the vast majority of the Texans starters will not be playing in it either. This is a game that I will probably not watch a second of.
Yes, because you'll be listening on 101 ESPN tonight.
That's correct. You should be tuning in tonight starting at 7 o'clock for pregame. Texans versus the Bears, a game that you cannot miss right here on 101 ESPN. I'm a company man. Between these two teams, who finishes with more wins in 2024, T-Bone?
Oh, that's fun.
Texans or the Bears?
I would say Texans. I think you're going to see growing pains with Caleb Williams. And with all their weapons, I think they're going to be good. I think there's a chance they finish above 500 maybe, but I think it'd be 9-8. I think the Texans are 11, 12 win team.
Which quarterback would you rather have over the next 3 years? We agree on that. I would go with the Texans as well. Would you rather have, if I told you in a vacuum you could take one of the two, Caleb Williams or CJ Stroud?
CJ Stroud for me is not even close just because I've seen him do it.
Same.
I'm with you. And I don't think it's going to be as bad as Bryce Young. And I'm not saying I think Caleb Williams is going to be an absolute.
Ooh, you're out on Caleb Williams.
I'm not out. I think he's overhyped. I don't think he's going to be as good as everybody's making him out to be.
Did you hear he was asked at Bears camp I think last week or over the weekend, what's the one thing that you're still really working on? And he was like, kind of recognizing blitzes and then kind of adjusting with my offensive line. And I was like, okay, that's where probably year one is going to be, where he can scuffle.
It was the same thing for Patrick Mahomes. I remember when he got into the playoffs and he saw what the Patriots were doing against him. It's like, holy, I don't know what any of this is. Like, this is confusing to me. And he played a great game, but you could tell there was stuff that was still confusing him early on in his career.
And Bill Belichick was licking his chops on the sideline.
Yeah, you saw it last year with C.J. Stroud. He got into the playoffs. He went up against the Ravens, and it was like, whoa. What are they doing right now? Because I don't understand any of this. It doesn't make sense to me. It's not computing quickly enough for me to be able to go through my reads. And it threw him off, and he had a really bad game, or for at least first half, in that game against the Ravens, and it was too late by the time he figured it out. I think year two is typically when you see that. And year one is when you can see the flashes, right? You see, okay, this is what it should look like. And then year two, they get some of that other, smaller details, finer details of the game ironed out. That makes sense. I actually like that answer from Caleb Williams because that's what it should be in year one. And my hope is you see enough of the flashes for you to be like, all right, year two, it's going to come together. He also has the receivers to be able to make him shine a little bit.
Yeah, that's arm strength on the run as well, too.
That's
seeing that. Whew.
Yeah, that's the good thing for him is that it's not like he's got nothing around him like Bryce Young.
He's Grant Francis. That's Tanner Hendrickson. I'm Brandon Kiley. In about 15 minutes, we're going to talk to Jim Hickey. He's the pitching coach for the Washington Nationals. He was there with Erick Fedde when Fedde had his first turn in Major League Baseball. It didn't go particularly well for Fedde in his first time around. What has Jim Hickey seen that has changed for Erick Fedde? And what did he see in him as a young player that led to this kind of success now? We'll talk to Jim Hickey about that in 15 minutes. Questions and answers is next here on 101 ESPN.
got questions, we may have the answers. Maybe. It's BK and Ferrario's Questions and Answers.
Presented by Window World St. Louis.com. Simply the best for less.
With Tanner Hendrickson and Grant Francis, I'm Brandon Kiley. 314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line for questions and answers. Let's start with this one from the 618. Guys, how far has Nolan Gorman fallen on this roster? Is he still an important piece of the future?
I don't know if he's an important piece of the future anymore. That I'm kind of questioning. I think right now he is kind of the, you hope, can be a platoon bat for you. Get starts against righties, you kind of figure out what you're going to do with your outfield, and you hope that he can get hot, and then you can put him back in the lineup and potentially even hit him like top 5. But if he doesn't, and he continues to, if he goes through some cold stretches, like there's a chance, like I don't think they would option him because he's got nothing to prove in AAA.
Right.
But like by the time we get to September, like there's a chance they could like call up Sajasi. I know Mo talked about him when he spoke to you guys in the media after the trade deadline. So then maybe he could get bumped down even lower. But I do think there is some question about what his future could hold here in St. Louis after this year.
I still think when you have that kind of left-handed power, you try to hold on to it as long as you possibly can to extract as much out of him as you can. I also wonder if in this offseason they consider taking a look at the Nolan Arenado future again and saying, maybe Nolan Gorman is our third baseman. That is pure speculation, and I don't even know if anybody would be willing to take on Nolan Arenado's contract at this point. My guess would be probably not. But if you can find a taker for him and you move Nolan Gorman over to third base, suddenly everything starts to fit in place a little bit easier. Donovan can be your second baseman. Burleson can be your DH/first base/corner outfield, depending on what the day is. And now everything kind of fits into place. It all makes a lot more sense. But I think a lot of this comes back to, okay, what is your plan with Arenado? And that is the North Star that guides every other decision for the team. We'll see what happens there. All right, from the 636, guys, what is your opinion on the Seattle Seahawks heading into this upcoming season? I think they're going to be what they have been over the last couple of years with Geno, 9-8, maybe 10-7 if everything goes in their way. I think the defense is going to be better this year with McDonald in charge, and it ultimately comes down to, do they have the receivers to elevate what Geno is as a quarterback, which is an average guy, 20th best guy in the league? Yeah,
I'm kind of with you. I think depending on how things go, they're anywhere between like a 7 and 10 win team. They're just kind of stuck in that mediocre state of you don't have a great quarterback, but you got okay weapons around him with Metcalf and Lockett. And then I don't know how much the defense is actually going to improve because I actually thought it was going to be better last year. Remember, I was like, fly, Seahawks fly. I predicted them to win the West. And then they laid a total egg. So I think the defense is going to be the thing that can hold them back along with Geno if he doesn't play well. So I think they're right in that like 7 to 10 win range.
From the 314, guys, if Gorman had a Jock Peterson type of career, would that be considered a success based on what the projections were when he first entered Major League Baseball? Jock Peterson in his career has a .240 batting average, a .340 on-base percentage, and an OPS plus of 120, so about 20% above league average. His year-by-year average is about 27 home runs.
I'd say absolutely. I know that we talked about him having 40 home run power. There's a chance he could have one of those years like Jock in 2019 hit 36 home runs. If that's what he became, I think that would be a success because 240 as a batting average, I don't know if he's even going to be that high of a batting average guy. But I'd say, yeah, because what do you think about Jock Peterson when he comes to the plate against a righty? You think a guy that can really change a game with one swing of the bat. So I would say, yeah, I hope Gorman can become that.
Man, I feel like these kinds of players are always a little underrated because you think about it and you're like, oh, he's a platoon guy. That's what Jock Peterson is. He doesn't hit against lefties, and that's why over the past few seasons, his plate appearances by year, 435, 425, and this year he's at 300, so he's on pace to basically be in that mid-400s type of a range instead of the 500 to 600 range that you hope for an everyday player. Would that be considered a success? He's been a multi-time All-Star. He's helped teams win a World Series multiple times in his career, 20% above league average offensively, and you add to Jock Peterson defensive value, which Gorman has, Peterson does not. I think that would be considered a success. If you give me Peterson's offense with what we see right now from Gorman defensively, I don't know if it's what people were hoping for at the beginning of his career. It's not the ceiling, but this is like a 60th percentile outcome. I would say that's a success.
Yeah, I just don't know, like, if he can have a ceiling that's going to reach much higher because he strikes out so much and he doesn't get on base as much. He doesn't draw the walks. Like when we bring up Kyle Schwarber, he's a light version of Kyle Schwarber because what makes Schwarber so special? He can hit 40 home runs, but he also takes his walks with his strikeouts as well.
Yep. I think Jock Peterson is actually a better comparison for Gorman than Kyle Schwarber.
I'd agree with that.
He's Tanner Hendrickson. That is Grant Francis, and I'm Brandon Kiley. Coming up next, Jim Hickey was the Nationals pitching coach when Erick Fedde was there in Washington in the first stint of his major league career. He's still the Nationals pitching coach now. So Hickey got to see the beginning of Fedde's career, and he's watching him across Major League Baseball now having so much success. What changed for Fedde when he went overseas? What did Hickey see from Fedde early on in his career that maybe is leading to some of this success now? We'll talk to Jim Hickey about that next year on 101 ESPN. Erick Fedde is expected to join the Cardinals while they're up in Chicago to take on the Cubs this weekend. His first tour in Major League Baseball was with the Washington Nationals. Spent 6 years with them. It didn't go according to plan. Fedde was a big-time prospect for them, a former first-round pick for them in the 2014 Major League Baseball draft. And ultimately, he ended up with a 5.4 ERA in his 6 years with the Washington Nationals. Started nearly 100 games for them. Had to go overseas, went to the KBO, figured some things out, added a sweeper. This year comes back, and with the Chicago White Sox, 21 starts, 121 innings, has a sub-3.5 ERA, has developed into a legitimate, at worst, middle-of-the-rotation starter. And so we're going to talk to Jim Hickey here in just a moment, former Erick Fedde pitching coach with the Washington Nationals, about how he has seen his development. What changed for Fedde between when he was with the Nationals and where he's at today to become a middle-of-the-rotation starter? I'm curious to get his insight into this because I like hearing, hey, when a guy had so many struggles previously, what was it that ended up making things work? What clicked for him eventually?
Yeah, I'm curious to know what he's seen from afar, because when you look at his career with the Washington Nationals, he was a guy that was like barely a fringe number 5 starter. And especially in 22, that was kind of at the back end of what you saw the Nationals after their World Series run. They kind of started to fall back into this kind of rebuilding team. And I'm curious to know what he has seen from afar, because we talked to the White Sox pitching coach, and he had mentioned, hey, he's just got different stuff now. You know, he's got a cutter now that plays up against left-handers. He's not really a splitty guy. He's got a little bit of swing and miss into his game, which he didn't really have when he was in Washington. Like I mentioned, he's kind of Kyle Gibson plus this year, 8 strikeouts per 9, got some decent stuff. Didn't really have that in his time in Washington. It looks more as if he was a pitch-to-contact guy. So I'm curious to see if he has seen anything from afar that has really changed for him.
The other thing, I just always like talking to Jim Hickey, honestly.
He's a good dude.
He's a really bright mind. He previously worked with the Tampa Bay Rays, so he's been a part of some big-time staffs. He worked with Joe Madden there, went to the Cubs for a brief period, and then has spent the last few seasons with the Washington Nationals. He's been developing very young pitchers, so we'll talk to him about that as well. You know, what is it like to develop pitchers in Major League Baseball today compared to when he first broke into Major League Baseball as a pitching coach with the Rays back in the mid-2000s? There's been a lot that has changed. You think about just how the Cardinals have gone about their development. They've kind of stayed stagnant while the rest of the league has completely changed their ways. He was also with Chaim Bloom down in Tampa Bay. So I'm curious to see if those guys had any relationship together in their Tampa Bay Rays days. Chaim Bloom at the time was kind of overseeing some of the player development. So I'd imagine they kind of crossed paths, but we'll see. We'll talk to Jim Hickey about that here in just a moment. He's the Nationals pitching coach. He was Erick Fedde's pitching coach with the Nationals when he first broke into Major League Baseball back in 2017. They spent 6 years together there. Jim Hickey joins us now via the 101 ESPN hotline. Jim, we appreciate the time, man. How you doing today?
I'm doing great, living the glamorous life on this day off, doing laundry and dishes and all that good stuff.
That's the best part, right? Getting home, having the day off, and be like, all right, now I get to just sit back, kick back, and then you realize, oh, I've got all the chores that I got to do at home.
Yeah, right. Not to mention all the paperwork. But anyway, enjoying my time. Thank you.
Hey, Jim, we appreciate you hopping on with us. I know you're an incredibly busy man. So let's start with this. So you had Erick Fedde with the Nationals from 2017 to 2022. And Fedde was a big-time prospect, a former first-round pick. And, I mean, he would tell you, things didn't go as expected. He ends up going over to the KBO to kind of get things figured out. Jim, you've been doing this a really long time. What did you see from Erick Fedde when he was with you, and did you see this kind of ability in him to be able to eventually figure it out?
Well, let me just say he came up in 2017, but I didn't join him until 2021, but I did spend a considerable amount of time with him. So in answer to your question, yes, I absolutely foresaw him being a really, really productive major league pitcher. Things don't always go according to the script, as you know, but I think probably, a big part of that was confidence. Absolutely, positively. He goes over to the KBO and he essentially wins the Triple Crown of pitching over there. And, the next thing you know, you're going from kind of walking on eggshells to 10 feet tall and bulletproof. And I think he's really, he's kind of feeling that right now.
And Jimmy, you mentioned finding his confidence. As a pitching coach, how hard is it to help with pitchers when they come up and you're working with them, trying to get confidence in just trusting their stuff?
Well, I think that's probably one of the most difficult things, and I say this all the time. You know, there's things that you can teach and there's things that you can't, but you can learn. And I don't really think that you can teach confidence, if you will, but I think that they could learn confidence if you know what I'm saying. You just, you know, it's one of those things where you have to be in that arena and experience it, whether it's a victory, whether it's defeat, you know, whether it's a bloody draw or whatever it is. But I really feel that you can point them in the right direction, absolutely positively, and help them along the way. But it's one of those things that has to come from within that player.
Jim, earlier this week, we talked to his current pitching coach, or the White Sox pitching coach, now current pitching coach is here in St. Louis, of course. But Ethan Katz joined us, and he said, you know, I think he learned a lot from his failure. Like, that was something that was really big for Erick Fedde, was going through failure and learning how to deal with it. And this season, he gets into tough spots, and he's like, all right, I've been here before, and previously this would have been a moment where things unravel for me, and now I can get through it. When you have worked with pitchers that reach that point in their career, what is that like for them as they have that kind of light bulb moment?
Well, I think that there sometimes is, and I would agree 100% with what he said. You know, he's definitely stronger because of his failure, and that kind of goes hand in hand with what I said earlier. That's one of those things where you really can't teach that. They can experience it and they can learn from it. But absolutely, positively, there's not always that one light bulb moment. You know, I've had pitchers where I could look back and just say, oh, yeah, that inning right there where it was bases loaded and nobody out, that was where he turned the corner. But a lot of times it's not as clear cut as that, you know, and just for Erick, it was more of a process. And I think that's probably true for, you know, most pitchers. There's really not just that one light bulb moment for the most part. It's just it's a long, tough grind, and he's been through it.
Jim, you've been a pitching coach since the mid-2000s, and you're dealing with a young pitching staff in Washington. What have you seen the difference when it comes to developing younger pitchers from when you started as a pitching coach to now in modern baseball in 2024?
Well, I think there's such more emphasis now on, you know, the things that you can measure. You know, before we didn't have the ability to measure, like, for instance, you know, vertical break, induced vertical break. But you knew a guy had a riding fastball, or you knew that it had life through the strike zone. And anyway, now that we can, you know, tangibly measure everything, I just think the big difference is the younger pitchers are more chasing shapes, if you will, the science of pitching versus the art of pitching. So I think that's probably the biggest difference. You know, these guys come up and they have much, much better, probably raw stuff across the board, but much less of an idea on how to actually pitch, how to manage the game. You know, and this is not across the board kind of stuff, but I think it's just basically true of this last generation, these last 10 or 15 years or so.
And Jim, you know, that, like, the big pitch that has kind of swept, no pun intended, through Major League Baseball over the last couple of seasons is the sweeper. And we've seen that here in St. Louis. Kyle Gibson has added one. It totally changed his arsenal. Sonny Gray added one, and he became a Cy Young candidate last year, was one of the best pitchers in baseball. And the same thing is true with Erick Fedde. He goes overseas. He adds that sweeper to his mix. What have you seen for pitchers that you've seen add that into their arsenal? Why, in your opinion, has it been such an effective pitch?
I think it just behaves a little bit differently than any other traditional breaking ball, if you will, and that's essentially what it is. You know, we probably used to refer to that as a slurve, you know, something between a curveball and a slider. But I will say that the sweeper, the quote-unquote sweeper, it has a lot more lateral break and a lot less depth, if you will, than a traditional breaking ball. So I think it just gives the hitters a different look. You know, they anticipate the ball behaving in a certain way because that's the way that it's behaved for the last, 100 years or so. And now all of a sudden, it's taking a left-hand turn without the depth on it. So, it's one of those things that not everybody can throw. It's one of those things that is absolutely positively, has helped guys out, like you mentioned. But once again, it's our ability to measure these things and to say, oh, my gosh, this has 18 18 inches of horizontal break and this, that, and the other, and it becomes very attractive. But there's no question about the fact that it's an effective pitch.
And Jim, with Erick Fedde coming here to St. Louis, Dusty Blake now gets to just see him firsthand, get that first experience with him. He's going to make his first start as a Cardinal tomorrow. What's it like as a pitching coach when a new pitcher is brought into the organization and trying to learn him while also trying to get him on the same page of what you guys want to accomplish as well?
Well, you're asking the wrong guy, because I was the Tampa Bay Ray for 11 years, so we never acquired anybody. We just traded them away. But, no, I have had that experience in my past, and basically you just try to learn as much as you can about them, prior
Jim, you guys
to the
had like
outing.
30 starters over a course of a season. You had to learn new pitchers. They just happened to come up from within your organization instead of from elsewhere.
Yeah, exactly. You just try to learn as much as you can about them prior to them coming over. And nowadays, that's a lot easier than it was even 10 years ago, because there's so much information out there. But I essentially would just allow them to tell me what they do, and basically stand back and watch for 2 or 3 starts before I offered any type of an input or whatever. But again, there's not a whole lot of secrets out there any longer, so it's a different ball game than it was even a short time ago.
Jim Hickey is our guest here on 101 ESPN. He's the Washington Nationals pitching coach. I always appreciate him giving us a little bit of time here on BK and Ferrario. Jim, I am curious. You mentioned that you spent a lot of time in the Rays organization. The Cardinals have a man in their front office now that was a part of the organization down in Tampa Bay while you were there. I was curious if you had any relationship with Chaim Bloom, any direct potential work with Chaim Bloom. He's somebody that, at least reportedly, is under consideration to potentially have a pretty big role with the Cardinals moving forward.
Well, I think every organization can say the same thing. They have somebody who was formerly a member of the Rays front office.
Sure.
But I have had extensive relationship with Chaim Bloom. A tremendous guy, as a matter of fact. When I first came on board, we're really going back now. But the minor league director was Mitch Lukovic, who was also my pitching coach in Appleton, Wisconsin in 1984. And Chaim Bloom was Mitch's right-hand man. He was helping head up the minor league system. And, of course, he ended up rising through the ranks, as did a number of those other guys. So, believe me, the Cardinals they couldn't do a whole lot better than a guy like Chaim Bloom, who knows, the baseball industry inside and out, top to bottom. So I got nothing but high praise for Chaim.
One of the things that has been stated is that he's specifically working with the Cardinals on how they develop pitchers down in the minor leagues. That was something that you certainly know firsthand. The Rays were amazing at, and they had a modern approach to it. They are somebody that every team is trying to emulate in terms of how they develop their young pitchers coming through their system. Can you give us a little bit of insight into how that works, Jim? Because you got to see kind of the finalized product when they got to Major League Baseball. What was it that was so effective from the Rays minor league pitching development?
Well, there was a lot of things. I don't think I could point to any one specific thing. I mentioned Mitch Lukovic, who was the minor league director, and that was the one constant throughout the whole entire my whole entire time with Tampa Bay was, a guy like Mitch and the pitching coaches and the people that we had in place. It was very, very consistent. So going way back, I don't want to bore you guys too much, but going way back, it was a very, very traditional type of an approach. These guys all pitched 700 innings to 1,000 innings in the minor leagues, whether it was a guy like Jeff Neiman, James Shields, David Price was the exception, but a guy like Jeremy Hellickson, all these guys that the Rays had developed, Matt Moore, they went through the traditional type of a development type of thing, which is no longer the norm. You look at a guy like Paul Skeens. I know he's the exception, not the rule. But here's a guy who's pitching, in a Major League All-Star game less than 1 year removed from college. So the game has changed a little bit in terms of the development. But I digress. One of the things that the Rays do very, very well is to identify what a particular pitcher does really well and to really emphasize that, accentuate that, and, make his development, make his path to the major leagues just a little bit shorter. And there's a number of organizations that pretty much follow that same type of a philosophy, that same type of blueprint, if you will. So it's really not unique to the Rays anymore, but they certainly do a really, really good job at it.
Hey, Jim, we could talk to you for 45 minutes if we had the opportunity to do so. We'll certainly be touching base sooner rather than later. Thanks so much for giving us a little bit of time today, giving us your insight into what it was like to be the pitching coach for Erick Fedde, telling us a little bit about the development in Major League Baseball as well. Appreciate it as always, man.
All right, very good. No problem. You guys enjoy the day.
Absolutely. That's Jim Hickey joining us on his off day from Washington. Appreciate his time, as always, here on BK and Ferrario. He's gracious with it, and we certainly appreciate that. I think it's interesting, man, when you look at what Erick Fedde was in Washington, what he has become in Chicago, and hopefully will be here in St. Louis, it serves as a bit of a reminder for guys like Zach Thompson or Matthew Liberatore or even Michael McGreevy if he goes through some slumps after what was an unbelievable debut, certainly here in St. Louis yesterday. It doesn't mean that things are over. Like, just because a guy struggles early on in their career, they can eventually figure it out. A lot of the time it requires failure, and a lot of the time it requires them realizing what I'm doing is not good enough, and I need to change, and I need to look in the mirror and say, okay, this is how I'm going to take my career into my own hands, and I'm going to get this thing figured out. And for Fedde, that meant adding a new pitch and throwing a cutter that became a little bit more effective. And once he did those two things, sweeper and cutter, everything was unlocked within his arsenal. I don't know what that's going to be for Matthew Liberatore. I don't know what his future is going to be, if it is as a reliever or as a starting pitcher. I do know that if he wants to be a starter, he has to find something that will get right-handed batters out.
Yeah.
And until that happens, he can't be the guy that he wants to be. And so that's something that, from our conversation with Jim Hickey, I was just thinking even more about the Cardinals' young pitchers than I was about Erick Fedde specifically.
Yeah, I was too, and I'm glad you mentioned Liberatore because that was the one that kind of popped into my mind. And honestly, Andre Palante a little bit, thinking of what he went through in his struggles last year to this year now as a starter, where how did he get right-handers out or get better at getting right-handers out? He went to a sinker trying to get it in on guys and just have more confidence. And you've heard Andre Palante talk about, and nobody taught me, how to have confidence. And that's what Jim Hickey says. You can't really teach it. That's something they've got to find internally. And Andre Palante has talked about, hey, I've just become more in the mindset of I'm going to be on the attack. I'm going to be a starting pitcher. And here's what I need to do if I'm going to make it as a big leaguer. And it's why he's having success. It's why he's going to be in the rotation while Lance Lynn is out. And it just comes down to some of these guys finding their confidence, figuring out what works for them, and tinkering. And it takes a while for that. It takes a long time for pitchers to develop. And I think even some of that confidence stuff can be said for even the batters as well. I know he's a pitching coach, but look at Jordan Walker, for example. He just needs to find some confidence in his swing to get back here to the big league level.
Somebody from the text line, 314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line to get involved in the show, said, imagine that taking what someone does well, accenting that, and focusing on it instead of highlighting some of their weaknesses. That sounds like such a novel approach. I will give credit where it's due. The Cardinals have done a pretty good job of that over the past, really just this season, honestly, with some of their pitchers. Like T-Bone's mentioned this a number of times on the show. Look at what they're doing out of the bullpen. They're looking at guys and saying, hey, this is your best pitch. Just throw that more. That is the approach that they've been taking, especially with sliders. And it's something that Boston has done a really good job of this season as well. Tampa Bay's been doing this for years, where they're like, hey, you throw a fastball, but it stinks. Throw it less. And it sounds so simplistic, but for years, people have thought, well, everything plays off of your fastball. Yep. And that's true to an extent, but as long as you have the threat of throwing the fastball, they have to honor it. You can't completely ditch it, but you can throw it less. You can have your primary pitch at this point in baseball be a slider, be a curveball. Like, you can throw that, what used to be a secondary pitch, more often, and it can still have that same level of effectiveness. And we've seen some of that from the Cardinals this year, where you've got guys that are coming out of the bullpen throwing primarily sliders or changeups or whatever it might be. And that's something that they've done, I think, a much better job of this year. I do think in the past that has been a fair critique of what the Cardinals have failed to do for some of their pitchers. He's Tanner Hendrickson. That is Grant Francis, and I'm Brandon Kiley. If you guys missed any of our conversation with Jim Hickey, the Nationals pitching coach, check it out on the podcast page, 101ESPN.com. The free 101 ESPN app is where you go to find it. It's all presented by
Dobbs Tire and Auto Centers.
Coming up next, what are the lessons that the Cardinals can learn from Dylan Carlson that can help better serve Jordan Walker and Nolan Gorman? We'll talk about that next year on 101 ESPN. with Tanner Hendrickson and Grant Francis. I'm Brandon Kiley. So what are the lessons that the Cardinals can learn from Dylan Carlson that can better help serve them with Jordan Walker and Nolan Gorman? This is something that I've been thinking about over the last 48 hours or so, T-Bone, since it was announced that the Cardinals were going to be trading Dylan Carlson. And really, since we've all known that it's just not working with Dylan Carlson. And I think this is a tough one because Carlson, to me, was such a unique case. Because he comes up in that 2020 COVID season, and it's just weird for everybody involved, right? You don't have the traditional spring training. You don't have the traditional runway for that year. And he's kind of going up and down between the alternate camp and the big league roster. And then you get to the postseason, which doesn't really feel like a playoff situation. You're going up against the Padres, and he's like batting cleanup for them. It's just weird for everybody involved. And then in 2021, he has this miraculous season where 15% above league average, like comes together, 18 home runs, finishes third in rookie of the year. You're like, all right, the Cardinals have something to build around now in right field. This is the player of the future for them. This is the type of potential star player that they've been waiting for. And then 2022 happens. And he's just not the same guy. And he deals with some injuries. And it's like, okay, maybe this is just like a sophomore slump. And then 2023 happens. It's injuries, and he's not getting the playing time that maybe he would have hoped for, and the production just totally falls off of a cliff. And then this year, he was supposed to be the starting center fielder, and he gets hurt right at the end of spring training, and he just never finds the runway to be able to get things back on track. And so, T-Bone, like, to answer the question of what are the lessons to be learned, I guess it's avoid injuries. Like, to me, that was really the downfall of Dylan Carlson is the injuries. And then the other thing is, like, don't get too high on any player based on one season of production. Back it up. I'm not going to, at this point, go too high or too low based upon what Mason Wynn's doing this year, based upon what Nolan Gorman did in any one given season, what Jordan Walker did last year.
Burley's doing this year.
The lesson is don't overreact to one season of production. It's hard to put up the numbers that Dylan Carlson did in 2021. But when Major League Baseball is an offseason to be able to prepare for who you are, what you are as a hitter, they can do that in an offseason. And when the underlying data shows, hey, there are some warning signs here that maybe that was not something that can be replicated the following year. Even more reason to be a little lower, a little more skeptical about whether or not that can be repeated. So that to me is the lesson, and it's less about like, hey, what can the Cardinals learn development-wise from Carlson? I'm not sure there was much. I don't think he was necessarily rushed. We saw in 2021 he was ready for the big leagues. I don't think that's it. I think it is injuries can derail a career, and don't get too high on any one given season. And I think that's pretty much all you can learn from this, unfortunately.
Yeah, I'm with you. I don't think there's anything on the development side because you saw the 2021 season. 2020, he was clearly outmatched. That Absolutely. One we can totally agree on. And again, it was just a weird year. 2021, he's third in Rookie of the Year voting. So it's not a development issue from my perspective. I think you're spot on. I think it comes down to, one, injuries can really derail a guy's career. I don't think he was ever going to be a guy that hit right-handed pitching very well because even in 2021, he was good, but he wasn't great at it. And then you saw that right-handers could really get him out. I think he was probably destined to be a platoon bat, was his future as a big leaguer, and hopefully still can be now that he's in Tampa Bay. But I think what you saw was injuries really sapped some of his power, some of his outfield range. I don't think he was very good in the corners this year defensively, and that was where he was supposed to be at his strongest. And then I think you just have to be ready to admit, like, hey, he had a one-off. I think you have to be a little bit more, and maybe some people don't agree with this, a little bit more kind of reactionary to reading and knowing when to part ways with the player. You know, I thought after the 2022 season where he finished 1% below league average, I think he suddenly became a guy that could have been expendable, where you looked at him and said, hey, he's very splitty. Even the underlying data still says, like, to your point, this doesn't seem like it's sustainable. It felt like after the 2022 season, he shouldn't have become a guy going into 2023 that was, hey, he's untouchable, he's got to be our center fielder. I think when you look at Dylan Carlson, I think it's more of a story as well of just holding on to him too long. Same with Tyler O'Neill. Only had the one season, held on to him just a little bit too long, sap all the trade value. It's honestly amazing the Cardinals were able to get a big league reliever for Dylan Carlson at this year's Major League trade deadline.
Somebody from the 314 text line, 314-399-9646 is the Air Cover Service text line. They said, guys, you can believe this or not, totally your call. But I heard this from somebody who's actually in the Cardinals organization. They were disappointed in the way that he trained. Didn't have much interest in the weight room. They wanted him to add more strength. like whether you believe or not that he wasn't interested in the weight room, it's pretty clear he did not have the kind of strength that maybe they believed he was going to grow into. I think when he came up, Cardinals people would tell you, like, hey, this is a guy that's going to grow into his power, right? Similar to what they said early on about Jordan Walker. And it was less about the swing with Carlson and more about, hey, just imagine what this guy's going to look like when he's 25, 26, 27 years old as he gets stronger and bigger from the weight room, the type of nutrition plans that we're going to be able to put together for him. And like, you guys can see it on the field. We've certainly seen it in the clubhouse. Carlson's just not a big guy, and he's never going to be. He has my frame. Like, I am not a big guy by any stretch. I'm a runner. I'm built for going out there and running long distances. And frankly, Dylan Carlson was built pretty similarly to me, just skinnier. So I don't know that he was ever going to be able to be the type of power hitter that maybe they hoped he would become. And I think part of that was because, like, whether it was because of a lack of interest in strength training or a lack of ability to put on that weight, I don't know that he had the frame to be that guy. That's different for Walker. That's different for Nolan Gorman. Those guys are big dudes that absolutely have the frame to become, like, legitimate power hitters. Another guy that's kind of slight is Mason Wynn. I think it's going to be really hard for him over his career to put on weight. But he also knows I'm not a power hitter. I'm not going to become that. That's not who I am. And he's got more speed, more athleticism than Dylan Carlson did in his career here in St. Louis. So just different types of skill sets. And I think one thing that I learned from Carlson is I think it is pretty necessary if you're going to become a star or if you're going to be a prospect that is hyped up as a star, you better have one thing that you're great at. And, like, when you look back at Carlson and his profile early on in his career, I don't know that you could say that about any one thing. Maybe his arm. Like, maybe his arm from the outfield was considered to be, like, an elite outfield arm. I don't know. But that's kind of it. And if your outfield arm is really the thing that I am, like, on a 20 to 80 grade scale for what they use in Major League Baseball scouting terms, if it's like a 65, 70, if that's the one thing that gets there for me, like, that ain't doing it, man. Like, Burleson might have that. Like, Burleson's arm is probably pretty similar in that regard, but he also has, like, 70 grade hit tool. Yeah. And so that's the difference to me. I don't know that Carlson ever had the skills, the tangible assets in his game to become a star. And if that's who you are, like, I would just try to sell high early on in a prospect's career.
Yeah, I'm with you there because I think it was 22 and we talked about Soto. And yeah, he wasn't the only guy that was involved in those Soto's talk. That also included your shortstop now, Mason Wynn, and Jordan Walker. But I remember saying at the time when we were talking about, like, whoa, do you do this trade with these guys in it? And I said, really, the only guy that wouldn't worry me about moving him, and it wasn't a shot against Carlson, but it was Carlson because of what you're saying. He wasn't elite at really anything. He was just good. And it never really made me worry that he was going to become like the next Randy Arozarena that left town, to where it was, okay, this guy's going to go away and he's going to become a future all-star constantly year after year after year. He just didn't have that kind of profile. He's the kind of guy that you look at and he kind of fits. Lane Thomas probably not even a good example of this because he's kind of elite at speed and crushes lefties, but he kind of fits in that role. A guy that's kind of a platoon bat, fourth outfielder that teams need. Like, winning teams need these kind of players on their roster when they're hitting their ceiling, which he did in 2021, but he's just never going to be a star. He's always going to be kind of an underappreciated piece on a good roster.
Somebody on the text line said, hey guys, what were Dylan Carlson's splits in the minors? Like, when he got to the upper levels, was he somebody that struggled against righties down there the way that he did in the majors? No. You look back at what he was in 2021 against right-handed pitching. He was batting .300, had an OPS of .930. In fact, that was actually slightly better than what he was doing against left-handed pitching. And that's the thing that is really difficult to be able to see. And this is why the Cardinals were really high on him. They saw this and they were like, holy crap, look at the production that he's putting up in the minor leagues. And this is around the time when they said, hey, he's the best kind of prospect that they've had position player-wise since Oscar Taveras and Albert Pujols. And that is technically true. Like, you look at the prospect rankings, they weren't wrong in what they said about Dylan Carlson. He was the best prospect position player-wise that they had since those guys. The thing that becomes really hard is, okay, how does that project to the major league level? And they were wrong. And John Mozeliak admitted as much recently when he was on with a morning show yesterday. And if you missed their conversation, I think it's worth your time. Check it out on the podcast page, 101ESPN.com, or the free 101 ESPN app. But he said, like, I was wrong. We got it wrong with Dylan Carlson, and we thought he was going to be more than he ultimately was, and it's because of the production that he put onto the field while he was down in the minor leagues. They thought he was going to be better than he ultimately was, And I get it. I don't blame them for it. And the problem was they didn't find out that he was going to be less until it was too late. And at this point, basically all of the value was taken out of what Dylan Carlson had, not just to the Cardinals, but to other teams across Major League Baseball. Coming up in 15 minutes, we're going to dive into the junk drawer. But next, there's been a call for Major League Baseball to bump back the trade deadline because of the lack of activity this year, since so many teams are still in the mix. Will that solve their problems? We'll talk about it next year on 101 ESPN. Hey, it's BK for my friends over at Victory Men's Health. They're helping me unlock my inner champion. They can do the same for you. When I went in there and I got my lab results back, they told me, hey, you're a little low on vitamin B12. You're a little low on vitamin D. You're a little low on your iron as well. We can get you hooked up with some supplements for all of those issues. That has helped me out. I have more energy now. I wake up in the morning. I used to be very reliant on caffeine. That's no longer the case. Now I get my B12 in me. That helps me with my energy. And I feel better. I feel like a better version of myself. They can help you do the same thing, whether it's vitamin deficiencies. Maybe you're low on your testosterone. There's a wide range of what you could be for your testosterone levels, and they'll let you know. Even if you're in that normal range, maybe you're on the lower end of it, they can help you feel the best version of yourself, potentially low testosterone, weight loss goals, erectile dysfunction. Victory Men's Health is the place to go to unlock your inner champion. They've got 4 great locations across the St. Louis area, and you can check them out today by going to victorymenshealth.com. That's victorymenshealth.com.
Grant Francis here with a SportsCenter update brought to you by Saliga Heating and Cooling. Yesterday, the Cardinals had their largest margin of victory so far this season as they won 10-1 over the Texas Rangers. They take 2 of 3 from Texas in that series. They'll hit the road today as they are in Chicago to take on the Cubs, starting a 4-game series at Wrigley. First pitch will be at 7:05, and it'll be Sonny Gray going up against Shota Imanaga. I'm Grant Francis. The SportsCenter update's been brought to you by Saliga Heating and Cooling, an independent American Standard heating and air conditioning dealer.
All right, so Major League Baseball has a potential concern on its hand. The deadline stunk this year. Like, let's just be totally candid about it. The number of players that change teams that are meaningfully going to change the postseason mix, it's like 2 to 3. Like, the best pitcher, most effective pitcher that was traded, starting pitching-wise this year at the deadline, was Jack Flaherty. Yeah. The second best pitcher was probably Erick Fedde, who you acquired effectively for Tommy Edman, who has yet to play a game this season. There were 0 top 100 prospects that changed teams this year. 0. There were 0 All-Stars that were traded this year.
I was just about to say, did you see how many All-Stars? I think 0 appeared in the game, but like 2 were like selected for the game.
It's not great. And that is not what Major League Baseball wants at the trade deadline. So the question is, how do you fix it? Do you need to fix it? And some have called for Major League Baseball to push this thing back, whether that's a week, 2 weeks, just get it further into August. T-Bone, I think that would have some potential unintended consequences that are maybe even negative, and I'm not sure that it actually solves the problem that baseball has right now on its hands. Because I think what you're seeing is just with the addition of a third wild card spot, there are more teams that believe they can get into the mix because there's just one more out potentially for you. Instead of having the 2, now I have one fewer team that I need to jump to be able to get into the playoff mix. So that's part of it. The other part of it is teams are now constructing their rosters in the offseason to get to the middle, to be an 84 to 88 win team, because that's what it takes now to get into the postseason with the extra wild card. So it's almost like this was always the logical endpoint for Major League Baseball, was to get to this place where everybody is kind of the same in the middle of the league. And you could argue that's good for the league because there are more fan bases that are more engaged later into the season. But when you get to a trade deadline, it also means there's more teams that aren't willing to sell because, hey, our fans are engaged. We're selling tickets. If we just sell off a bunch of assets, that's going to cost us money. And it doesn't really do enough because there's no teams that are trading legit prospects anymore for us to make it worth our time. So if you pushed it back, could the Rangers maybe have seen themselves as a seller if they end up going through a little bit of a slide here? And they just lost 2 or 3 against the Cardinals coming up. They've got the Red Sox, the Astros, and the Yankees. Maybe at that point they would view themselves as a seller. But that's kind of the only team that I can see that really would have changed their trajectory if we had pushed this thing back. And yeah, maybe that really changes the look of the deadline because it's Max Scherzer and Nathan Eovaldi that are changing teams instead of the guys that did. But that's kind of it, man. And I'm not sure you change where you're doing the deadline because of one team not selling this year at the deadline.
Yeah, and like in that scenario that you lay out, maybe that team that ends up becoming a seller within that, whatever it is, 2.5 weeks that you extend out the deadline, they may not even have those pieces that we're talking about. You know, it could have ended up being like the Pirates could have just become sellers. And looking at the standings from August 15th of last year, so the middle of August, let's just say they said, you know, instead of July 30 or July 31st, let's go right smack dab in the middle of August. You have the same muddy NL playoff picture that you would have had compared to this year. Because I'm looking at the standings from last year on August 15th, and the wild card picture, you had Philadelphia, San Fran, and Miami were the 1, 2, and 3 wild card spots, and they were all separated. Those 3 teams that were in the playoffs by 2.5 games. And then outside looking in, Cubs were a game back, Reds were a game back, Arizona was 2.5 games back, and the Padres were 5.5 games back, and we know that they were going to be buyers. It's the same thing as this year's deadline. Yep. Everybody was just slightly above or right at 500 that viewed themselves in the playoff race. There's about 6 teams fighting for the wild card spot. You've got the same issue. There's just that muddy middle, and this was the fear of adding that extra wild card was, hey, everybody's just going to do what you're talking about, where you just kind of push for that middle, and then you just kind of decide what you're going to do when you get to the deadline. Well, the problem is about 15 teams are thinking that way. 15 teams, 20 teams believe, yeah, we'll build like a 80-win team, and then we'll hopefully add like a piece or two here and become an 85-win team and just kind of sneak into the playoffs. That's the problem with the wild card format now, is it's just allowed everybody to sit at that muddy middle there to where I don't even think it's good for the game of baseball because, one, everybody's pushing for the middle. And you mentioned, like, okay, some people that were a fan of this wild card system would argue, okay, well, now it's engaged more fan bases. I think it's engaged more fan bases, but they're more angry at their organizations than anything because everybody is upset about being stuck in the middle. You mentioned, I think it was last week, of how many teams across Major League Baseball would you say are happy with their build? And there's five. Well, some of that is because some of them are rebuilding, and that sucks. But all these teams that are stuck in the muddy middle, I think they're frustrated, not so much because, sure, some players haven't developed to what they thought they were going to be, but it's because it just doesn't feel like your organization's pushing hard enough. And I think it's become more frustrating for fan bases than anything else in this new wild card format.
But at the same time, like for the MLB, it's still better for them from an engagement standpoint because even if fan bases are irritated with their teams maybe not going all in and being okay being in the middle and trying to just squeak in, those fan bases are still going to be engaged for the majority of the season because they are right there. At the end of the day, like, you still have a chance. So those teams, instead of, if there's more teams that are just full-on sellers and they're like, yeah, we don't have a chance, we're going to sell everything, the fan base checks out with, a couple months left in the season or more. But with this, like, even if it makes the deadline a little bit less interesting and there are less players moving and less big names moving, like, the fan bases of the teams that are right on the edge, they're still going to be engaged almost all the way through the season.
Well, think about, like, the Giants, for example. I think they're the perfect team for what you're talking about there, Grant, because they didn't sell. They decided we're going to keep Blake Snell. We're not going to give up on some of our other assets. Like, they decided to kind of stick with it. The one thing they did sell was like Jorge Soler, basically, and Alex Cobb, who was already on the injured list. That's basically similar to what the Cardinals decided to do with Tommy Edman, right? So their fan base is probably still engaged. They don't care about this team. They don't believe in this team. Giants fans are ready for them to get a star. They've been waiting for that for like 3 years, and the front office is legitimately coming off under fire at this point because, like, hey, you've been the same team now basically since you went up against the Dodgers in that postseason series and did all of the split stuff. And since then, like, they've been the same team that is trying to win the Rays way, but not doing it as well as the Rays have. And they're just kind of there. Nobody believes they're going to make the postseason. But if you're their ownership, you're probably looking at this and saying, yeah, but we're 4.5 games back. If we sell 2 weeks from now, we're going to be 10 games back. Right now, we can at least convince ourselves and potentially convince some of our viewing audience, you should come to the ballpark because we've still got some guys that you potentially will like to watch. And, hey, we get hot for a 2-week stretch, we'll be right in this thing once again. And now people are starting to tune in. They're starting to come back out to the ballpark. Tickets are being sold. And that's why they decided to do it this way. It's smart. It's smart from an ownership play. From a viewer's perspective, like, if I'm just putting on my fan hat, I think this is terrible for baseball. I don't think it's good at all because now you've got a bunch of teams that are selling you bad products. Like, the Giants are a bad baseball product. The Cubs are a bad baseball product. Their president of baseball operations went on their local station yesterday at 670 The Score in Chicago and said, I'm not, like, opposed to giving out a $300 million contract, but I am much more risk averse than many of the other president of baseball operations across Major League Baseball. In other words, saying, yeah, don't expect to see us signing that kind of a contract while I'm in charge in Chicago. I mean, that's how you end up being 52-58. That's how you end up with the team that's costing you, what was it, $230 million this year, and you're sitting 6 games below 500. That's who the Cubs are now. And I think that is the mindset for many teams, most teams probably, across Major League Baseball. And in part, they can get away with it because you can win 84 games, get to the postseason, and anything can happen once you get into the playoff field. Everybody is Jerry DiPoto. Everybody. All these dudes that are in charge, they don't say it out loud the way that Jerry DiPoto did, but he said out loud in an interview, hey, if I can win like 84 games per year for the next decade, and one of those years when we get to the postseason, we'll potentially break through and get to a World Series, and that's the goal. That's the mindset for most of these GMs across baseball. And it's because of the current setup in Major League Baseball.
Well, and at the same time, the more often teams like the Arizona Diamondbacks make the World Series, and a couple of years ago,
100%.
the Phillies making the World Series as a wild card, the more
Braves,
often that's
the
going to happen.
2011 Cardinals, the 2006 Cardinals. Like, you think of the Cardinals are actually the perfect representative of this.
Yeah.
2004, one of the best teams we've ever seen, losing the World Series, and it's remembered as like, hey, that's one of the best teams we've ever seen, and they didn't win. 2006, 2011, arguably like two of the worst teams from those eras, and I'm not taking a shot at them. They won the World Series. That's how they're remembered. The victors get to write the history. But those weren't the best teams that the Cardinals had. 2006 was much worse than 2004. 2011, you can make a pretty strong argument. Like, I'm not sure that was a better team than 13 or 15, but they won the World Series. And so that's how they're remembered, is they were the champions. And it's because of the way that the format is set up. You get one dude that gets super hot in the postseason, you could ride that all the way to the World Series, man. Get a couple of starters, couple of relievers, 2 or 3 hitters that get crazy hot for a month. Boom, we're working our way to the World Series and potentially winning it. It's crazy. It's crazy the way the baseball operates, but that's the way it goes. And so if you're in John Mozeliak's shoes, or you're in one of the other shoes across Major League Baseball, you say, can I get to 86? If I can get to 86 wins, I'm feeling pretty good about it. So why am I selling? Keep cashing them checks. I'm good to go.
And then Dave Dombrowski's like, no, prospects be damned. We're going for it.
AJ Preller, hey, what do we have prospect-wise? Oh, I already sold everything. What about my top 5 guys? Let's go ahead and send those out. We'll get us a couple of relievers. It's amazing. All right, coming up in about 10 minutes or so, the Cardinals might have fallen into 2 long-term pieces on their roster, and they're guys that we didn't even give consideration before this season. We'll talk about that coming up in 10 minutes. The Junk Drawer is next year on 101 ESPN. All right, boys, let's dive into the junk drawer. T-Bone, have you seen this package that ESPN's going to be putting together, which is essentially cable but not paying for cable anymore?
Yeah, I did see this today. They finally announced it.
It's about time that we've got something like this. It's a new Disney, Fox Sports, and Warner Brothers sports streaming service. It's called Venue Sports. It's going to be, am I seeing this correctly, $43 a month?
Yeah. You gonna get it?
Do we need this?
No.
I feel like we have gone a bridge too far with all of this streaming stuff. And Grant, you're a millennial. I'm curious your thoughts on this stuff as well. Because, like, this is the target audience. The three of us in this room is the target audience for what they're putting out there right now. So it's going to have ESPN, ESPN2, ESPNU, SEC Network, ACC Network, ABC, Fox, all of the Fox Sports, Big Ten Network, TNT, TBS, True TV, ESPN Plus. You got all that stuff available for you on this. I'm not paying that much money for this, though, man. Like, I would just rather get ESPN Plus and Disney, like that.
Yeah.
That
That's
grouping
like
together.
$15, I think, is what I'm paying for it.
So I'm basically paying an extra $30 for Fox Sports and TNT, TBS, and True TV.
Yeah.
I think I'm good, man.
I will say, and I'm a very abnormal TV watcher. Like, I don't really watch TV outside of sports. So, like, I can go without Netflix, Hulu, like, whatever. I'm not going to really watch it anyway.
Sure.
So, because I'm not really watching anything but sports, this might be good for me just because that's all it is. So, since I'm not paying for any other service, if it's just sports all grouped into one, that would make sense for me. But for most people, like, most people would watch more than just sports.
Yeah.
How much is YouTube TV? $73 a month for the base plan.
And that probably includes some of those
customers
sports.
can get it for like $51 a month. I feel like that would probably have almost everything that you're getting here, no?
Yeah, you'd have Fox. You would have ESPN
stuff,
I
right?
would believe. Yeah, you wouldn't get like ACC Network and SEC Network, but how much are you really losing on that?
Sure.
And you would get, I don't know if TNT has like some weird deals, so you may not get them there, but yeah, you would get most of it. You'd get CBS in that, but you wouldn't get it on that package.
I'll go do that.
Yeah. And like if you have like, you've got a wife, you've got a kid at home, so like you also probably want some stuff, like if you buy a YouTube TV, you might get like Disney, for example, or you can get some television shows. Like that's where it is for like my dad, for example, is he won't probably purchase that, I would guess, because what my mom likes to watch cable stuff. She likes to watch HGTV, so there's no 100%. Point for him to pay for that.
It's super weird, man. I don't understand what we're doing here with some of this stuff, because we've basically taken cable and said, hey, what if we got an a la carte option of all of these things and it costs us even more than what cable was previously? It's like, well, let's just do the cable thing again. Like that made way more sense for everybody, because we've taken all of this content and said, well, let's distribute it elsewhere. And it makes sense for the providers, because the providers are now getting all of the money, right? They're going direct to the consumer. They're essentially saying, hey, previously, like if you're ESPN, we made $20 per subscriber off of charging Charter or DirecTV for our content. And now we can just go to individuals and say, hey, forget paying the $150 for DirecTV. Now you're just going to pay $20 for us. And in theory, it makes a lot of sense. I would much rather pay $20 for my ESPN stuff than paying it through the $150 for DirecTV. But now you think about it, you're like, wait, so I'm paying $20 for ESPN. I'm paying, in this scenario, $50 for all of the sports channels that I used to be able to watch. And then I've got Netflix, and I've got Hulu, and I've got Apple TV, and I've got HBO Max, and
Amazon
I've got
Prime,
Peacock, and I've got Amazon Prime. And you look at it at the end of the day, and you start doing all the math, and you're like, wait, I'm paying $200 now for all the stuff that I used to be able to watch just on cable, essentially. It becomes even more now than it used to be. It's super expensive now to just be able to watch the stuff that you used to watch on cable. It's crazy.
I can't tell you, because I just recently kind of redid my Disney subscription, so I'm paying for that. I can tell you how frustrated I am that I get ads now. What happened to the days of no ads? Man, I'm watching a 30-minute show and I got to see 2 ad breaks pop up. Oh, it's so frustrating.
Well, that originally was is one of the biggest proponents of streaming was that you don't have
that's
ads.
Why you got rid of cable. You're like, oh, no commercials. This is great. And now the commercials are back.
I will say, like, I've gotten to the point where if I go to find a game that I want to watch and it's on Amazon Prime or Apple TV, it's just like, okay, I'll find something else to do. Like, I'm not going to pay for the service just because I want to watch this game tonight. I'm not going to do it. Yep. So I just say I'll check the score and see what happens. I have a lot of friends
that just don't watch the Cardinals anymore.
Yeah.
They're like,
that's the other thing, too.
I'll just go back through. Yeah, that's not included.
Yeah.
You just go back through and like people will just say, hey, I just go to Cardinals.com the next day and I watch the condensed game. Spend 12 minutes in my morning instead of paying the whatever it ends up being per month to be able to watch the Cardinals game or to be able to watch the Blues games. Either listen to the Blues games on 101 ESPN, listen to the Cardinals games on KMOX, and then I'll go back and rewatch the condensed game. And that's how I get my Cardinals content now. Or they'll listen to the shows throughout the day here on 101 ESPN to get their analysis of what happened the day before. I'm going to be very curious to see 10, 15, 20 years from now how sports watching habits will have changed because of the way that all of this is going down right now. It's not easy. It's not easy if you're a sports fan to be able to watch all of your content nowadays. All right, coming up in 15 minutes, we'll play a game of Believe It or Not. 314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line. You give us a scenario. We'll tell you if we are believing it or not here on 101 ESPN. But coming up next, the Cardinals might have almost accidentally fallen into two long-term pieces on their roster, and they're guys we didn't even talk about prior to the start of the season. We'll tell you who they are next here on 101 ESPN. With Tanner Hendrickson and Grant Francis, I'm Brandon Kiley. Alex out today. He and his wife welcomed in their third baby girl into this world last night, so he's going to be off for the next couple of days. I'm going to be replacing him at the Federated Auto Parts Raceway at I-55 tomorrow from 4 to 6 o'clock, gearing up for the Ironman 55. Don't miss out on that extravaganza taking place tomorrow and Saturday. Federated Auto Parts Raceway at I-55 in Peevely, Missouri. Get all the details right now at 101ESPN.com. T-Bone, one of the things that's been a quiet storyline, kind of under the radar over the course of the last month or so, is what we have seen offensively from both Michael Ciani in center field and Pedro Pages behind the plate. These are two guys that were complete afterthoughts going into the season, so much so that John Mozeliak called Michael Ciani Michael Sinise heading into the regular season. And Pedro Pages was the guy that when he was called up to the roster, we were like, what? The third catcher thing? Again, we're really doing this? And then they sent Ivan Herrera down to keep Pedro Pages on the roster. And we were like, really? This light-hitting, decent defensive catcher, like we're really doing this again? And what we have seen is Pedro Pages in his last 17 starts has recorded a hit in 15 of those games. He's been an above-league average hitter over the course of his last 17 starts. You go back to mid-July, and since then, Michael Ciani's batting like 300. He has suddenly become, on the season, a 250 hitter, and he's just slightly below league average offensively on the year. T-Bone, what does the emergence of both Michael Ciani and Pedro Pages mean for this team, both in the short and potentially the long term?
Yeah, I think in the short term, what you're seeing from Michael Ciani is he's probably a guy now that, at least against a righty, a lefty, I think there'll still be an argument for it if Pham's on the bench. If Pham's in the lineup, I think we've seen the Cardinals are just going to probably stick with Ciani. But Ciani's a guy now that I'm not necessarily sure you have to pinch hit late in the game for, unless it's like, of course, tying runs at second base, then probably I'm going to Michael Ciani. But if you're like down by 2 and he's like leading off an inning, you probably just continue to roll him out there because he's become a really good hitter at the plate and is now starting to hit for average. And the same can be said for Pedro Pages. They are both, though pretty significantly below league average on the season. To your point, they've been playing really well here in the last month or so to where you feel comfortable when they go up to the plate. Early on in the game, if there's a runner at second base, you don't look at the bottom of the lineup now and go, oh, man, if we hit the bottom part, we hit Pages and Ciani, so I guess we're not scoring a run. No, I don't think they're going to hit a home run necessarily, but I feel a little bit more comfortable of, okay, can he put at least a good at-bat together? Maybe moving the runner over, or maybe even just get a base hit into the outfield, and you have the potential to score a run. And then in the long term, it becomes a lot easier to have these defensive-minded guys in your lineup, as long as they're not significant black holes offensively. And that was my fear when I saw Michael Ciani originally when he got called up. Kind of what the Victor Scott effect was when he got called up, to where it was, okay, yeah, he's great defensively, but he's like doing truly nothing at home plate. How much longer can we stick with him? And I think now that you're seeing Michael Ciani hit a little bit, you're starting to see Pedro Pages hit a little bit, you don't necessarily have that fear of when those guys are in the lineup, it's not a it is a drop-off, but it's not so significantly so that you have to almost go, okay, should we still have him in as a defensive specialist?
Since June 12th, Michael Ciani's batting .320 with an OPS of .762. That's over his last 100 at-bats. This is not a particularly small sample size. Here are some of the primarily center fielders that have a lower OPS, again, since June 12th than Michael Ciani. Corbin Carroll, Cody Bellinger, Luis Robert, Julio Rodriguez, Mickey Moniak, Brandon Marsh, Jared Kelenic. Like, you're talking about some pretty good players that, again, are behind Michael Ciani by OPS since June the 12th. 6 weeks, essentially, of really productive baseball by Ciani. And my favorite thing about him, and I think he is more the story here than Pedro Pages. I don't know how real this is from Pedro Pages as a hitter. I think Pedro Pages can work out a pretty nice career as a backup catcher in the big leagues, but
Maybe what Kisner was for you.
Sure.
Maybe less offense. Perfect.
He's a perfectly adequate backup catcher. Ciani has a chance right now to be able to establish himself as a starter in the big leagues for the next 5 to 7 years. Like, he could be long-term what Kevin Kiermaier created for himself in the big leagues. And that's a super valuable role that will probably never be totally captured in some of the more advanced numbers. Like, I don't know if Michael Ciani is going to, at the end of the year, be considered a positive wins above replacement player. But when you just watch the games on a day-to-day basis and you think about the value that Siani brings to your team, whether that's catching everything that has at least a 10% catch probability in center field, which he has so far this season, or laying down bunts when you need him to, which is just this like forgotten skill in Major League Baseball. He leads the team in sacrifice bunts, not just for this year, but in a single season since 2004. So Taguchi was the last guy on the Cardinals that had more sacrifice bunts in a regular season than Siani has this year. Or the value that he brings on the bases when I think he's up to like 13 stolen bases on the season now, so far this season. He just does a little bit of everything. And he knows how to contribute on a night in, night out basis. And he's a winning baseball player. He's doing for you what you thought Tommy Edman was going to be in center field this year. He probably has a slightly better arm than Edman had in center field as well. He's more natural at the position. Like that's just the spot that he's always played. I think Siani's potentially carving out a role for himself for the foreseeable future here in St. Louis. Kudos to him, man, because I didn't see this coming. I thought he was going to be an afterthought and he was going to be sent down sooner rather than later. It hasn't been the case at all. He's been a productive player that I want to see in the lineup every day. Like, if they're going to go with Tommy Pham as an everyday player, I don't want to see Siani pulled from the lineup.
No.
I would rather see like a Nolan Gorman, which is crazy to say, and I never could have thought I would be saying this 3 weeks ago. But I think Nolan Gorman's more likely to lose his everyday role than Michael Siani at this point.
I would agree, and I mentioned, there were conversations of, okay, should the Cardinals, especially early on in the season, go more towards that offensive lineup where it is, okay, do we now have to look at Nootbaar in center field because we really need to start hitting, trying to get our best lineup out there? Credit to the Cardinals, they've stuck with this defensive identity that they want to be at, and that's why, to your point there, I think you're right. As much as like I've been screaming from the mountaintops, you've got to find a way to get Nolan Gorman going. He's got to be hot when you get to October. He's probably the guy that's more likely to come out because Michael Siani can really save this kind of. It's not as heavy a pitch-to-contact pitching staff as it was just 2 years ago, but they're still not that high up in terms of strikeout stuff. Like, Lynn's got decent strikeout stuff, Gibson's got decent strikeout stuff, but it's not like the elite of the elite like the L.A. Dodgers or the Houston Astros. So what does Michael Siani do? He takes away that slug baby slug from other teams because he can really shorten those gaps out in the outfield. So that's why he stays in center field, and now you feel more comfortable because his bat isn't such a drop-off. The Kiermaier comp is perfect because if that's what he is, a winning baseball team can have that guy in your lineup playing gold glove defense in center field and hitting 8th or 9th in your lineup every day.
Here's a question for you because I find this interesting. Is this a lesson that you got to just let a player go and try it for a while? Because the only reason why Michael Siani has had the opportunity to have, at-bats at the plate is because of his wins above replacement in the outfield. Like, his defense has allowed him to have this sustained run and the opportunity to hit, even though it was awful for a while, batting for Michael Siani. For a player like Jordan Walker, for example, like, his defense in the outfield was nowhere near as valuable as Michael Siani, but his upside at the plate is. So is this a situation where if you switch the roles and Jordan Walker was given a longer leash in the outfield to figure it out at the plate, is there something there that you can learn from this?
I think actually Burleson is the guy that you're probably using as the more direct comparison because you have to do something elite. Like, I don't care what it is. If you've got a bat that is elite, I'll figure out the defense. If you've got defense that is elite, I can figure out the offense as it continues. And that's the lesson to be learned, I think, from both of those players. Alec Burleson last year was not good defensively. You put him out in the outfield, and it was like a 3 out of 10. He was below league average defensively. But they kept doing it because they believed this bat-to-ball skill is going to translate. And it didn't for the most part last year, but you kept giving him those opportunities, and eventually it did translate. And this year we've seen some of the fruits of that labor. With Michael Siani, it was almost the opposite. Hey, the bat isn't there. And for most of the season, it was horrific. Like, it was so bad offensively. He was almost an automatic out. But he was playing at such a high level defensively in center field that they're like, you know what? He's doing stuff that's helping us win baseball games. And if we continue to allow him to stay out there, he's going to keep winning us baseball games with his glove. And hopefully over time, the bat will come around. And they've seen enough now that it's like, okay, he's still doing the same stuff defensively out there for us, and the bat has come alive a little bit. So now we're extracting value on both sides of the plate. With Walker, the problem was it was neither. You didn't have the glove that was keeping him in the lineup. You didn't have the bat that was keeping him in the lineup. So I can't really show you the upside. And I think the same is true to a degree with somebody like a Nolan Gorman. I think his defense is underrated a little bit at second base. I don't think it's bad. I think it's league average. I think he does one thing well, which is turn the double play. I think he's better at that than Brendan Donovan is. I think they're pretty comparable overall in terms of their defense at second. I think Donovan is a little overrated. I think Gorman is a little underrated. I think they're average at second, and that's fine because of the potential for the bad. But when you have a Siani in center, and you've got a Tommy Pham in right potentially, and you've got Burleson at DH, now things get a little crowded. And so when you look to Nolan Gorman, you say, okay, I'm not keeping you in here specifically because of your defense, and the bat hasn't produced the way we were hoping. Donovan is a guy that has produced offensively. We're going to go with him there. So I think that's, to me, the lesson is you got to do one thing at an elite level to be able to have this kind of a profile and earn that playing time over the extended stretch.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think that's where it gets more complicated for Gorman is if Burleson hadn't emerged, if Burleson was more of an average hitter this year and was putting up he's hitting for average, but if he wasn't putting up the home run power you're seeing, I think it's a lot tougher of a conversation with Gorman. I think the emergence of the left-handed power for Alec Burleson has made it to where you can look at Nolan Gorman and say, okay, yeah, he's got elite power, but we've also got really good power in Alec Burleson, and we can be average at second base and cut down on our strikeout by pushing Gorman to the bench.
So here's the follow-up question for you guys. With all of what we just said, does that mean that for you, the player with the most to prove in the second half of the season is Nolan Gorman? Is he the guy that would fit into that criteria because he potentially is getting squeezed out of this lineup?
He is for me because I love the power in the bat. But the problem is it's too inconsistent. And now I don't think you're going to learn that in the final 2 months if he can find a way to be consistent. But can he carve himself a role on this team? Because if he's getting pushed out right now, and I can look at the roster and say, okay, so maybe it's not Tommy Pham that's on the roster starting in right field, say, next year, but that could end up being Jordan Walker's spot. Next year's probably sink or swim year for Jordan Walker. And then I'd have Newbar in a corner, and I've got Siani in center field. So if that's the case, that means Donovan's probably at second base and Burleson's probably the DH. So what's Gorman's role? If he can't really establish a significant role on this team in the final 2 months of this season, I'm not saying I'm giving up on Nolan Gorman, but I think he suddenly becomes a trade piece in the offseason to where what we talked about with Carlson, sell high. Yeah, exactly. And he would get you something significant in return because of the power from the left side and how important that plays in October, and he's got control. I think he's the guy that is under the most, don't know if it's pressure, but the most to prove in the second half of, okay, here's where I belong on this team. And maybe that is just as simple as, can you become like a threat off of the bench? Can you just become this left-handed bat that they go to a high-leverage right-handed arm, and we say, here's our trump card, boom, it's Nolan Gorman. He's going to come up, and he's going to do damage when he comes off of the bench.
My answer to this question is Sonny Gray. I think Sonny Gray, to me, is the guy that has the most pressure. Now, it's for different reasons. Because with Nolan Gorman, he might lose his spot on the roster, or at least in the starting lineup, and then potentially in the offseason, lose his spot here in St. Louis. Sonny Gray's ERA in August since 2019, 0.7, 2.4, 2.9, 2.0, 2.0. He's been excellent in the month of August in the last 5 full seasons. His ERA in the month of July for the Cardinals this year was 6.7. The Cardinals cannot and will not be a team that competes for a playoff spot and accelerates through the postseason without Sonny Gray being the guy that he was over the last 5 years in the month of August. If that guy doesn't show up, if he doesn't figure out what's going on with him, the Cardinals don't have a number 1 starter. And that's problematic because every other team that's chasing these wild card spots has that number 1 starter. So to me, and this is more about the Cardinals than it is specifically for Sonny Gray, his money is there. He's going to be here next year, most likely. Like, that is a guy that they're trying to build around. But in terms of the pressure for this team, I think Sonny Gray, for me, would be number 1 on that list. Coming up in about 15 minutes, we've got to talk a little bit about the St. Louis Blues. Are they in a holding pattern for the next couple of seasons when it comes to their cap situation? We'll talk about that. But next, it's time for Believe It or Not here on 101 ESPN. Hey, it's BK. You guys know about Circa Sports in Illinois. It's our favorite app to be betting on. Me and Alex, that's our exclusive sports betting provider. When we go over to the Illinois side of the state line, that is the place that we're getting the best money line splits. That is the place where we're going to be making sure that we do not get limited. That is a problem on some of these other sports betting apps. When you win, they'll limit you, and that is not the case with Circa Sports in Illinois. But that's not the only reason why we go to Circa Sports. Out in Vegas, if you go out there prior to the start of the NFL season, you can get involved with Circa Millions or Circa Survivor. With the Millions, $6 million in guaranteed prizes. It's $1,000 per entry, 5 entries per person. You pick 5 teams against the spread each and every week, and the winner is taking home $1 million. Circa Millions, that's how you get involved in that. For me, I even prefer the Circa Survivor, though. $1,000 in entry. You pick one team straight up each and every week to win. And if the team ends up winning all the way throughout the regular season, you're going home with $10 million in guaranteed prizes, potentially. It's the biggest pot they've ever had. Circa Survivor, Circa Millions. It's all through Circa Sports. Be a part of that today. If you are someone you know has a problem with gambling, call 1-800-GAMBLING or text ILGAMB to 833-234.
I'm going to say not believe it.
Ooh.
I think they're above 500 team. I had this conversation with my dad the other day. He thinks they're going to finish below 500. I think they'll be above 500. I just look at all these other teams. They got better pitching, man. Like Arizona, better rotation, and they're getting their guys back, and they've got a good offense. San Diego, they're going to get their guys back. And then you look at, like, Pittsburgh, they scare the crap out of me because of their rotation. I think you're going to see the Cardinals end up missing the playoffs, and their offense isn't good enough to make up for their lack of pitching.
I think the Cardinals are going to make the playoffs, and I was the one that was more negative on the team just a few days ago before the trade deadline, but just with how things have been unfolding the last 2 games after the deadline, and maybe it's just a quick jump start to the system after the deadline, but the way they've been performing and how they've been winning has just been so impressive. I could see them riding this momentum and end up going on a much longer win streak and make the playoffs.
Guys, the National League stinks. Have you been paying attention to what's happening around the Cardinals right now? Now, some of the wild card teams have emerged. Like, the Mets are playing better baseball right now. The Padres are playing great baseball right now.
And we fall into this category of the NL stinks.
Sure, I agreed. But, like, the Phillies have not been playing inspired. Now, I think this is just them hitting that wall where it's like, hey, sometimes good teams fall into a little bit of a lull.
Dog days of summer.
Absolutely. I think that's what's happening with them. I don't think the Braves are very good this year. I think the Dodgers, it's happening again, guys. They are limited in terms of what their lineup is beyond the top 4 guys in the lineup, and their rotation is crumbling. Yesterday, for the first time in his career, Clayton Kershaw finished a game without completing a strikeout. He did not record a single strikeout in that game, and they need him. Like, this is not a want. They need Clayton Kershaw to be himself again. I look around the National League, and I look at the fields of teams that they're going up against. I think they're going to make the playoffs. I'm believing it. I think they will end up getting in. I think the Padres will get in, and I think the Diamondbacks will get in. I think those are your 3 wildcard teams right now, and I am not writing it off that they can end up overtaking the Brewers in this division as well. That is something that I will say, like, I know they're 5 games back. I think it is still in play that the Cardinals end up coming back in this division. T-Bone, what do you got?
Believe it or not, we will see one of Michael McGreevy or Gordon Graceffo make the playoff roster if the Cardinals make the playoffs.
Not believing it. I like where you're going with this, but I think they have shown an unwillingness to trust those young pitchers right now, so I'm not believing that.
I think I'm going to not believe it as well, especially given that, like, right now the conversation, and I was just talking to you about this earlier, BK, is who's going to be outside the starting rotation? Like, if Andre Pallante gets moved to the bullpen, that's going to bolster your bullpen so you don't really feel the need to call someone else up. So, no, I'm going to forget this as well, or not believe it, rather. Wrong game.
It's all the same thing.
Same thing.
Whoa, totally
but
different. I'm
not going to believe it either.
Yeah, I'm not going to believe it because BK said what my thought process was of if they haven't really moved those guys to the bullpen yet, I don't really see it. It will be interesting to see what they do when we get to September. You know, they get the 2 extra roster spots. If I had to guess, like right now, their hope is that Steven Matz can move to the bullpen come September.
I think Victor Scott might be in your playoff roster.
I hope so. I really do because of his speed, not so much his defense because Siani takes that role. But the speed can be what was Terrence Gore, was that what his name was? Who, like, nobody knows of as a big leaguer outside of he was on, like, 1 million playoff rosters just to pinch run and steal bases. But I don't think it'll be Graceffo and McGreevy, especially when they talked about at the deadline, why did they want Sean Armstrong? It wasn't because of, well, one, they do see something that we don't, apparently, not his 5.5 ERA, but they wanted a veteran in the bullpen. So you're probably not going to put the kids back there. So my guess is if there's anybody that moves back there from the rotation, it's Pallante or Steven Matz.
Grant, you got something for us for Believe It or Not today?
Yeah, let's go with this. We had this conversation before the show as well. For the Blues, over the next 2 seasons, so when Justin Falk and Torrey Krug's no-trade clauses are up in the 25-26 season, the Blues are going to move on from both of them as soon as their no-trade clause becomes a modified no-trade clause.
I don't think you're going to be able to get rid of Torrey Krug. I think you are going to be with Torrey Krug for the next couple of seasons, and that's not going to change. I don't think anybody's taking it on unless you give up a first-round pick plus a prospect for him, because that's kind of the going rate right now for that kind of salary. I'm saying not.
Yeah, I'm saying not as well. I don't think you can move on from Torrey Krug. And if Falk does not have a bounce-back season, and Falk has what we saw this year, or I think, what was it, 2 years ago, he wasn't very good either, he becomes kind of in the Krug conversation. If you can't really move him unless you're attaching a first-round pick to him. So I'm going to say not. I don't think you're going to be able to move on from those 2 guys. You just got to play out those contracts.
I think it depends heavily on what Torrey Krug's injury situation looks like this season. Like, if he's out for the entire season, then yeah, I don't think they're going to be able to trade him immediately. But if he does end up coming back and he plays all right, I mean, there's been proven interest in him. Army had a trade lined up with him just a couple seasons ago, and it sounded like he had something in the works this offseason, but it fell through maybe because of this injury to Krug. So if he gets that injury panned out, I think there will be enough interest in him to where Army can move him. And I also think because of this Krug injury, if Falk gets more time on the power play, his numbers might get a little boost, so his numbers actually might go up compared to seasons past. So if Torrey Crew can come back and play a little bit towards the end of the season and he looks somewhat promising that he can get back to his form, I think they could trade both of them.
All right, let's get to a few of these from the text line. 314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line for Believe It or Not. Guys, believe it or not, Brandon Crawford will still be on the Cardinals roster in October if they end up winning a wild card round.
Oh, that is interesting.
I would say not believing this. I don't think that Brandon Crawford has a role on the Cardinals in October unless Mason Wynn were to get hurt. And if Mason Wynn were to get hurt, you would be able to add Brandon Crawford to the active roster after that game. You could get through that game with Brendan Donovan playing shortstop for you, and then you could add Brandon Crawford onto the roster afterwards. So I'm going to say not. I do not think that he would make the active roster. I think you have other guys that could do a better, or could have more of a role, specifically a Victor Scott, for example.
Well, that's what I'm trying to think of, is like who replaces him.
Victor Scott, Thomas Ajayci.
Probably is one of those two.
Potentially a right-handed bat.
So, yeah, I will is it believe it or not? I will not believe it that he will not be on this roster come October, because you're right. He doesn't really have a role. He's not really a pinch hit guy. That's the left-handed bat is either going to be Gorman if he's not in the lineup, or Matt Carpenter. I do think Carpenter will be on the roster. He's swinging the bat pretty well, so he's at least has a role.
All right, believe it or not, Grant, curious your thoughts on this. From the 314, the Cowboys will win the NFC Championship this year.
No. Not believing that. I thought we were going to say win the division. I was going to say yes, believe it. But anything in the playoffs, no.
Yeah, I'm not believing this either. I think this is the year that they decide it is time to go in a new direction. We see this all the time, right? The Bills, for example, they just went through okay, this isn't working. We're going to have to change some things around. And I think the Cowboys might even be more drastic, where they have to change the coach, maybe change the quarterback, see what they're going to do moving forward. Yeah, I do not think they're going to.
I was about to say, believe it or not, Mike McCarthy gets fired.
Yeah, it's a little different because like the Bills one for me is like, hey man, you just ran into the GOAT now in Patrick Mahomes.
Sure.
Like it's tough. It's very tough to get over that hump, but they were probably right to make the decision to kind of retool it on the fly. It's a little different for the Cowboys because I do believe that they won't win the NFC Championship. But they're just running into a team that is so well built and so well sustained in the San Francisco 49ers. It's almost a little different because when we talk about the Chiefs, we talk about the best quarterback in the sport. When we talk about the 49ers, it's just the best well-constructed roster in the sport. But yeah, I won't believe it because I can't see them getting past San Fran.
That's Tanner. He's Grant. I'm BK. 314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line to get involved in the show. Grant gave us a little bit of a preview of our next segment with his Believe It or Not here in this one. Are the Blues in a holding pattern for the next couple of seasons, given what their cap situation currently looks like? We'll talk about that next year on 101 ESPN.
Grant Francis here with a SportsCenter update driven by Johnny Londoff Chevrolet and Johnny Londoff Autoplex. Impressive outing for Michael McGreevy in his first MLB start yesterday. He went 7 innings, had 5 hits allowed, and only 1 earned run against as the Cardinals took down the Rangers 10-1, and they take 2 of 3 in that series against Texas. Tommy Pham also a big day yesterday, going 3 for 4 with 2 RBI. Cardinals will look to stay hot as they're in Chicago to start a 4-game series with the Cubs. Sonny Gray will be going tonight for the Cardinals, going up against Shota Imanaga for the Cubs. First pitch from Wrigley at 7:05. I'm Grant Francis. The SportsCenter update's been driven by Johnny Londoff Chevrolet and Johnny Londoff Autoplex. See them at londoff.com. Chevy, together we drive. Are you kidding me?
All right, so earlier today I was reading over on The Athletic, and they posted a piece. 7 NHL teams that'll shed bad contracts and gain major salary cap relief in 2025. T-Bone, you'll be surprised to learn the St. Louis Blues not on this list. Not a part of the 7 teams that are going to gain significant salary cap relief heading into next season. It's not a surprise. They've got most of their players locked up for at least the next couple of seasons. You look at the forward group, Kyrou, Thomas, Shin, Booch, Saad, Joseph, Texier, Sonny. They're all signed through at least the 2026 campaign. So that's not surprising. Then you look at the blue line. It's basically the same team. Same thing. Top 4 defensemen all signed through at least, not this season, next year. 3 of the 4, Falk, Krug, and Parayko, are signed through the following year as well. So you've got 3 years remaining on those contracts. As I was looking at this, I started thinking even more about it. And, man, I understand what Doug Armstrong's trying to do here. They're trying to transition into the next young core group of players. They're trying to go through this retool. Does it feel to you as if the Blues are in a bit of a holding pattern, though? Because of some of the contracts that they're saddled with, especially Falk, Krug, Leddy to a degree, although $4 million really isn't hampering you at this point in his career. Does it feel like they're in a holding pattern, in your opinion?
I think so, because I especially on the blue line, I don't think you're going to be able to get out of any of those contracts. And I know that the Blues really want to. And honestly, they're kind of positioned okay to where they can just hold on to them because they are in a retool. And if you look at their pipeline, they don't really have much that's down in the minor league system that you look at and say, okay, we've got to find a way to clear this spot on our roster for this defenseman down here in the AHL or that's in juniors. They don't really have those guys. Where it gets more interesting, and it's why it makes sense that they've got these forward contracts with most of them, as what you said, kind of expiring after next season, is, okay, now you see the path for a Bolduc. You see the path for a Snugger or Dvorsky coming in. But I think, yes, they are at a holding pattern, and especially on that blue line, because I can't see a scenario where they can move Justin Falk. I can't see a scenario where they're moving Torrey Krug without attaching serious assets to try and get them out of town. Maybe they can get out of the Nick Leddy deal, but I just think if you're the Blues at this point, you're kind of just holding on to these, buying your time, and then in 2 years you try and reset this defensive core and try and reflip what this blue line looks like. Now, once you start getting in those forward group guys that I was just talking about.
I think for this upcoming season, it is a holding pattern. I think this upcoming season is almost going to be identical to what we saw last season. I don't think there's going to be much improvement per se, but I think there's going to be improvement when it comes to building your prospects and waiting another year to get those reinforcements from your prospect system. But past that, I really do think that you could maybe move on from Justin Falk and Torrey Krug. I think there's a good chance that you can do that. As I said just a little bit ago, Torrey Krug's the more difficult one because of this injury. But if he's able to come back, play the back half of the season, and be serviceable, not great, but serviceable, a team will take him at the trade deadline, especially a team that maybe is having power play issues that thinks we can use him and we can write him for our power play, or a team that's lacking in offense and they really need help from somebody on the blue line. A team at the deadline would take that. I think they would. Same with Justin Falk, especially if he gets some power play time with Krug out and he's able to produce a little bit. I think we undersell a little bit the fact that nobody would take these contracts, especially if the Blues are able to eat some salary on these contracts. I think there are teams that would say, I think these two players could help us in our window, and I think that if they're together on the same team, I don't think that's a recipe for success. if they're by themselves, I think you can get away with having either a Torrey Krug or a Justin Falk on a team and still be good. I think that a team would be able to do that.
The thing that makes me nervous about it is that you've seen multiple teams take on $3 million in salary this offseason for 1 year. And it required those teams to give up a second-round pick to be able to get off of that money. Yeah. Detroit had to do that with Wallman. The Blues had to end up doing that with Kevin Hayes. Second-round pick, basically the same amount of salary for this upcoming season for another team to be willing to take on that salary. With Krug or Falk, even if you ate 50% of their salary for the next couple of seasons, it would require you to eat that, and then it's $3.5 million for them still. And it's for at least, I mean, if you traded in like this year at the deadline, it's for 2 more years beyond this year. I just think it's a lot to ask. And so I think that they are a little bit stuck. And I went through like next year's salary cap because this year they're not cash strapped. This year they still have $7 million to play with if they wanted to go out there and make another significant addition. I don't expect them to. But next year you look at it, like Joel Hofer is going to be an RFA. Let's say it's super cheap. Like you do a bridge deal with him, that's a couple $1,000,000. You need 3 defensemen next year, whether you're bringing back Perunovich, P.O. Joseph, Tucker, Suter, whatever you end up doing. You need like 3 more defensemen to sign. Let's say it's $5 million total for those 3. And then you've got Toropchenko and Neighbors that are both coming up on RFA status. Let's say Neighbors ends up being really good combined, $7-8 million, something like that, right? That's $15 million for those players that I just mentioned. That essentially gets you to the roster that you need just numbers-wise for next year. They currently have $17 million in cap space for next season based on what the projected cap is supposed to be. So they don't have any money to play with. So what would require for them to do basically anything next offseason, it would require somebody to take on this cap space that you're talking about, and that only opens up $3 to $4 million. Yeah. So I think they're just in a really weird spot right now with their cap situation where they need somebody else to be willing to take on this money that the Blues desperately need to get out of if they're going to be improving in the next couple of seasons with veteran additions. They can help themselves with their pipeline. The veteran additions, it's going to require somebody to do something that, at least for me, I currently don't see them being willing to.
And that's why, like, I think they're stuck this year, and I think they're stuck with the big contracts next year, where I think it will become where they might be able to do some of that fandangling that you're talking about there is, can you move Nick Leddy at $4 million? But even then, like if he has another good season, I think you can probably move him and not have to eat a ton of that or give up an asset attached to him, like a second-round pick, for example, because it's not a salary dump. It's more of, hey, this guy can actually contribute to a team. Same for Brandon Saad, who's going to have a modified no trade at $4.5 million. We talked about it. You have Brandon Saad on a contending team, you can basically write in pen, you're getting a 20-goal scorer. It's just a matter of, can they find trade partners for them? And they need good seasons out of them. They need Saad to have another good season. They need Nick Leddy to have another good season. I can't see them moving on from a guy that's making 6.5 on their blue line and Falk or Krug coming off of injury. I think the guys that they might be able to is Brandon Saad and Nick Leddy. But again, it has to require good seasons from those guys, and then those guys be willing to go somewhere because they have no trade protection.
He's Tanner. That's Grant on BK. Coming up next, we'll hit the rewind here on 101 ESPN. With Tanner Hendrickson and Grant Francis, I'm Brandon Kiley. If you guys missed anything from today's show, be sure to check out the podcast page. 101ESPN.com and the free 101 ESPN app is where you go to find it. It's all presented by
Dobbs Tire and Auto Centers.
If you go over there after the show today, you'll see our interview with Jim Hickey, former pitching coach for Erick Fedde. He was with Fedde when Fedde was with the Nationals previously, prior to his stint over in the KBO. Got some really good insight into Fedde and how the Rays went about their pitching development, what it's like for young guys in Major League Baseball nowadays. So really good stuff, I thought, with Jim Hickey earlier today. But I want to go back to our conversation that we had about the Cardinals, what we learned from them in the last couple of days. Michael McGreevy, great start yesterday. And really, to me, the lead story from this series against the Rangers was the offense. You started to see some signs of life from Paul Goldschmidt. That's been the case over the last few weeks. I think Tommy Pham has added an element to this team that they severely lacked. That's both on and off of the field. But, man, you can't overlook the production that they're getting out of him. And that's not going to sustain long term. He's got like 5 batted balls and they're all over 100
OPS?
miles per hour. Yeah, I'm not going to expect that out of him. But I loved this quote from Ollie Marmol. I'm curious kind of what you think of this, T-Bone. He said, prior to the game yesterday, we've been playing good baseball, but Tuesday had a certain energy to it. It had a little bit more bleep you to it. I enjoyed it. And Wednesday, they were relentless as well. When you hear that from Ollie, and you think about what we have seen from the Cardinals, it checks out. Like, that makes sense. I agree with him. It did have a little bit more bleep you to it. They finally won a couple of games by more than 4 runs, which has not been the MO for this team. Is that something that you expect to sustain? Was that just like hey, we got a bump from the trade deadline? How did you view what the last couple of days could mean long-term for the Cardinals?
I think for me, it was more of just a bump from the trade deadline of, okay, the front office sent the right message to the clubhouse. The front office identified what all of us identified. They had 3 pretty big holes in terms of they needed a right-handed bat, they needed another starter, and they needed a bullpen arm. And the front office was able to go get that for them. As a clubhouse, that feels good. That feels like the front office believes in you. So now you're at that point in the season where you're kind of in the dog days of summer, and you get this added boost, and you get Tommy Pham, whose first at-bat's a pinch-hit grand slam to add on top of it. And it does kind of feel like okay, let's go. We've got the reinforcements, the front office, ownership, they believe in us. It's time for us to take off. And I think that is more of what they are feeling. Now, Pham continues to hit and play really well. They might just mold into the Tommy Pham personality, which is the bleep you mentality. So, but that's more of what I took away from it. I think they can mold more into kind of being what Tommy Pham is, but I thought it was more of a trade deadline boost than anything else.
Today will be an interesting day, man. Sonny Gray told us after his most recent start, I know what I need to do. I know how I need to get locked in, but it's going to take a lot of energy. It's going to take a lot of focus, and I'm ready to commit to that. Well, today he's back on the mound. He's doing it against the Chicago Cubs. He's going up against Shota Imanaga, a left-handed starter who the Cardinals had some struggles with last time around. The Cardinals added Tommy Pham to be better against lefties. Paul Goldschmidt has started to show some signs of life again against lefties. This is a really good test for the Cardinals, and the Cubs are not a particularly good team right now. This is a team that you can take advantage of. I can't wait to see it, man. I can't wait to see what it looks like, the improvement to the offense. Sonny Gray going out there after what he said in his most recent start. This should be another sign of, was what we just saw real? Was it a blip on the radar? Can they translate this? Can they sustain this? This is a good moment to be able to find out exactly what they are.
Yeah, and this is the kind of series where the Cardinals have struggled in Chicago. Very tough place for the St. Louis Cardinals to play. The rotation lines up right. You got Sonny Gray going up against what should be an offense.
Gray, Fedde, Gibson, Michaelis. That may be your playoff rotation right there, and you've got those the next 4 days.
And you got a fresh bullpen thanks to Michael McGreevy and his start yesterday, going 7 strong innings. Like, okay, this is where we should see it pieced together going up against a bad team in the Chicago Cubs.
Got a couple of guys days off against the Rangers as well. Like, this is... They're in a good spot right now, here. You should win 3 out of 4 in Chicago. That's what you should do. That should be 100%. The expectations going into the series is win 3 out of 4, given the pitching matchups, given where your bullpen's at, given what your offense has been lately. That's what the expectations are, and now we find out, are they capable of going out there and actually doing it? That's what John Mozeliak said right after the deadline. He said, I like this team, But it doesn't matter what I think. It's about them going out there and proving to everybody what they're capable of. So we'll see that tonight. He's Tanner Hendrickson. That's Grant Francis, who did a fantastic job getting the late call, literally late, after Alex Ferrario, he and his wife welcomed their third baby girl into this world late last night. So Grant's going to be with us once again tomorrow for them and for me. We'll talk to you guys tomorrow at 11 a.m. The Fast Lane's coming up next.